It began on a road that should have been nothing more than a line through the forest. Manhay sat at a crossroads carved into the Ardennes, where narrow roads met beneath tall trees that pressed close on every side. In winter, the forest swallowed sound. Snow softened everything: footsteps, engines, even fear, until movement felt unreal, like the world was holding its breath. Manhay was not a city. It was not fortified. It was a place defined by its position rather than its size. And in December of 1944, position was everything. The Ardennes Offensive had already torn a wound into the Allied front. German forces had surged westward through snow and fog, breaking through thin lines, scattering units, creating confusion that spread faster than orders could follow. Villages fell in rapid succession, roads filled with retreating troops and advancing armor at the same time. Maps stopped matching reality. What had been labeled a quiet sector became a battlefield overnight. Manhay lay directly in the path of that chaos. The crossroads mattered because movement depended on it. Armor could not simply cut through forest at will. Supply trucks needed roads, artillery needed access, infantry needed routes that led somewhere. Whoever controlled Manhay controlled the flow of men and machines through a critical stretch of the Ardennes. Losing it meant opening a door that might never close again. When American forces moved into the area, they understood the risk immediately. The ground offered little protection. Open approaches exposed defenders to fire. The forest limited visibility to a few yards. Snow hid mines, ditches, and danger equally. Defensive positions were improvised, scraped out of frozen earth that resisted every shovel stroke. They did not have time to build strong defenses. They did not have certainty about what was coming. They only knew they had to hold. German units approached with urgency sharpened by desperation. The offensive was already behind schedule. Fuel was running low. Every delay mattered. Orders pressed forward movement without hesitation. Tanks advanced along narrow roads where turning around would be difficult. Infantry followed close, weapons ready, nerves tight. The first clashes around Manhay were sudden and violent. Artillery fire tore through the forest, shattering trees and throwing snow into the air in dense clouds. Shells landed among positions barely established, collapsing foxholes and forcing defenders to relocate under fire. Machine gun fire cracked through the woods, echoing strangely as sound bounced between trunks and hills. Visibility shrank to fragments, muzzle flashes, moving shadows, brief glimpses of armor emerging through smoke. The battle quickly became confused. Units lost contact, orders were delayed or misunderstood. Small groups fought isolated engagements without knowing who held the ground beside them. In the forest, direction lost meaning. Every road looked the same. Every turn carried risk. Tanks struggled to maneuver off the narrow routes, their tracks slipping on ice and churned snow. Infantry advanced cautiously, knowing the enemy could be only steps away, hidden behind trees or in shallow depressions, invisible beneath white cover. Manhay changed hands, not once, not cleanly, but repeatedly. American forces were pushed back, regrouped, and counterattacked. German units seized ground, only to be hit by artillery and forced to withdraw. The crossroads itself became a magnet for violence. Wrecked vehicles clogged the road. Burning tanks lit the winter night with orange fire that reflected off low clouds. Smoke hung heavy between trees, refusing to disperse. Cold became its own enemy. Weapons jammed, fingers numbed. Wounded men lay too long in snow that drained heat faster than blood. Every action required more effort. Every mistake carried harsher consequences. As the days passed, the larger picture began to shift. Allied reinforcements arrived. Artillery was brought forward in greater numbers. Air power threatened whenever the clouds thinned. German fuel shortages worsened. Units that had pushed hard found themselves stretched thin, fighting not just resistance but exhaustion and scarcity. Manhay became a test of endurance. German forces attempted renewed attacks, trying to break through before momentum vanished completely. Infantry surged through the forest under covering fire. Tanks pushed down the roads again, engines straining. The fighting grew more desperate, less coordinated. Each push cost more than it gained. American counterattacks followed with increasing strength. Units moved deliberately, reclaiming ground piece by piece. Artillery pounded known routes. Infantry cleared forest edges and road junctions with grim determination. Tanks advanced carefully, using lessons learned through weeks of winter combat. The crossroads was contested one final time, and this time, it held. When the fighting finally eased, Manhay was nearly unrecognizable. The forest was shredded. The roads were littered with wreckage, snow-covered broken equipment and shattered trees alike. The Crossroads remained, but it carried the weight of everything that had passed through it. The Battle of Manhay did not end the Ardennes Offensive on its own, but it mattered deeply. It marked another place where momentum failed, where speed slowed into struggle, where the offensive burned fuel and time it could never recover. It showed how terrain and determination could stop even the most aggressive advance when conditions no longer favored movement. Manhay mattered because it held. It held long enough for the front to stabilize, long enough for reinforcements to arrive, long enough for the offensive to lose its final chances. Tonight, we return to those snow-choked roads and dark forests, to the crossroads that refused to stay quiet, to the soldiers who fought without certainty, without comfort, and without pause, to Manhay, where the Ardennes Offensive pressed forward one more time and found nothing left to take. Before we continue deeper into this story, I want to ask you something quiet and personal. Where in the world are you listening from right now, and what hour has settled around you? Is it late and still, or does the night feel unsettled? And one final gentle invitation for tonight. If these long, immersive journeys into history help you slow down, breathe easier, or feel quietly accompanied as the world grows calm, consider subscribing and let these stories stay with you when the roads grow quiet. December 23rd, 1944. The crossroads at Manhay sits quiet under 18 inches of fresh snow. Frozen fog hangs between the stone houses like curtains, limiting visibility to barely 50 meters. American soldiers from the 7th Armored Division stamp their boots and blow into cupped hands, their breath forming small clouds in the -10-degree air. They have no idea that in less than 48 hours, this forgotten Belgian village will become a killing ground where Germany's last desperate gamble collides with Allied exhaustion. The men arriving at Manhay are not fresh troops eager for glory. They are survivors. Just 72 hours earlier, these same soldiers fought a desperate rearguard action at Saint-Vith, a market town 20 kilometers to the east, where they held off 2 German panzer divisions for 6 critical days. The 7th Armored Division entered Saint-Vith with approximately 4,500 men. They withdrew with fewer than 3,000. The missing were not all dead. Some were captured, some were scattered across the frozen Ardennes forest. Some were simply gone, swallowed by the chaos of retreat. Now these exhausted survivors find themselves positioned at another crossroads, ordered to hold another position, told once again that this junction is critical to the entire American defensive line. Manhay does not look like the fate of nations should depend on it. The village consists of perhaps 50 stone houses clustered around the intersection of 2 roads, the N15 running north toward Liege and the N28 heading west toward Hotten. Belgian civilians still occupy some of these homes. Approximately 200 people who have lived through 4 years of German occupation were liberated in September and now find themselves once again on the front line. They watch from shuttered windows as American trucks arrive, as officers study maps in the village square, as gun crews position anti-tank weapons at the crossroads. The Americans offer reassurances. The Germans are finished, they say. Saint-Vith broke their momentum. This is just a precaution. But the veterans know better. They hear the distant rumble of artillery to the east, growing louder each day. They see the look in their officers' eyes when they think no one is watching. Christmas Eve approaches, and the men try to maintain some sense of normalcy. Letters are written home, carefully censored to reveal nothing of locations or casualties. A few soldiers share chocolate bars with Belgian children who emerge cautiously from cellars. Someone finds a small pine tree and plants it in the snow outside the command post. But the preparations are interrupted constantly by the work of war. Foxholes must be dug in the frozen ground, a task that takes hours and leaves men sweating despite the cold. Machine gun positions must be sighted with overlapping fields of fire. Communications wire must be strung between positions, a task made nearly impossible by the frozen ground and the constant fear of German infiltrators cutting the lines. The 7th Armored Division has perhaps 800 men defending a perimeter roughly 2 miles in diameter. They have 18 Sherman tanks, most of them the older M4A3 model with the 75mm gun. They have 3 anti-tank guns, 2 of them positioned at the crossroads itself. Against them, intelligence reports suggest, are elements of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, estimated at 15,000 men, with 60 or more tanks. The officers study their maps and try to make sense of contradictory orders. Brigadier General Robert Hasbrouck, commanding the 7th Armored Division, has spent the past 48 hours arguing with 3 different corps headquarters about whether to withdraw, where to establish defensive positions, and who exactly is in command of this sector. The American command structure in the Ardennes has collapsed into chaos. 1st Army wants withdrawal to shorten defensive lines. 18th Airborne Corps wants aggressive defense in place. British 30th Corps on the left flank is moving south, but coordination is minimal at best. Field telephone lines are cut repeatedly by German infiltrators, or simply by the weight of snow and ice. Radio communications are sporadic. Atmospheric conditions and overcrowded frequencies mean that critical messages take 4 to 6 hours to reach their destinations, if they arrive at all. Into this confusion, Hasbrouck must make life-and-death decisions about when to stand and when to retreat. The soldiers at Manhay do not know these details. They know only what they can see, their foxholes, their fields of fire, the woods to the east where the Germans must come from. They pass around rumors, each one more alarming than the last. The Germans have super-heavy tanks that American guns cannot penetrate. SS troops are executing prisoners. No one surrenders to them. The entire Allied line is collapsing. Manhay is surrounded. Most of these rumors are false or exaggerated, but some are true enough to be terrifying. The 2nd SS Panzer Division approaching Manhay is indeed an elite unit, veterans of the Eastern Front, where they learned to fight in winter conditions that make the Ardennes look mild. They do have superior tanks, Panthers with long-barreled, 75mm guns that can kill Shermans at 1,500 meters, and they do have a reputation for atrocities. 6 months earlier, this same division massacred 642 French civilians at Oradour-sur-Glane, burning women and children alive in a church. As darkness falls on Christmas Eve, the temperature drops further. Men huddle in their foxholes, sharing body heat, taking turns on watch. The village of Manhay settles into an uneasy quiet. Belgian civilians retreat to their cellars, having learned that basements offer the best protection from artillery. American headquarters in the village center maintains radio contact with outlying positions, receiving hourly reports. All quiet. Nothing to report. Movement in the woods, but no contact. Then, at 2200 hours, the reports change. Forward outposts hear engines, heavy engines, the deep rumble of tracked vehicles. German voices in the darkness, commands in a language most Americans do not understand. The sound grows louder, closer. Tank commanders peer into the darkness through periscopes, seeing nothing but fog and falling snow. Gunners sit with hands on firing controls, waiting for targets that do not appear. Infantry crouch in foxholes, fingers numb despite gloves, trying to distinguish shapes in the darkness. The final radio transmission from the forward outpost comes at 2300 hours. The voice is young, uncertain, frightened. Movement in the woods, the radio man reports. Lots of movement. Sounds like armor, sounds like a lot of armor. Then a pause, the sound of voices in the background shouting. The radio man comes back on, his voice now urgent. They're right on top of us. Panzers, Panzers, request. The transmission ends abruptly, cut off mid-sentence. The radio operator at headquarters tries to re-establish contact. He calls the outpost by code name, once, twice, 3 times. Only static answers. In the village square, officers exchange glances. They know what that silence means. The Germans are not coming. The Germans are here. Outside, the men in the foxholes hear it now too. The grinding roar of tank engines, growing louder by the second. Somewhere in the darkness, closer than anyone expected, German armor is moving toward Manhay. The veterans among them recognize the sound, the distinctive note of Maybach engines that power Panther tanks, deeper and more powerful than the radial engines of American Shermans. Some men pray. Some check their weapons one more time, though they have checked them a dozen times already. Some simply wait, knowing that in minutes or hours, their quiet Christmas Eve will explode into violence they cannot yet imagine. The snow continues to fall, covering the tracks and foxholes, erasing the boundary between friend and enemy, between the living and those about to die. The American soldiers at Manhay are not heroes yet. They are cold, tired, frightened men who want to survive the night and go home. They do not know they are positioned at the hinge point of Germany's last great offensive, that their stand or fall will help determine whether Hitler's gamble to split the Allied armies will succeed or fail. They know only that something terrible is coming through the darkness, and they are all that stands between that terrible thing and the road to Liège. In the village church, a small nativity scene remains from before the war, somehow surviving 4 years of occupation. The plaster figures look out over empty pews, and if any of the American soldiers notice them, they might wonder what peace on earth means in a world where Christmas Eve brings not celebration, but the sound of enemy tanks grinding through the snow toward them. December 16th, 1944, 05:30 hours. The Ardennes forest erupts. 1,600 German artillery pieces fire simultaneously along an 85-mile front, a bombardment so intense that it registers on seismographs in Switzerland. Allied soldiers who survived this first barrage will later say the world simply ended, that sound and light and sense merged into one overwhelming force that obliterated thought. This is the opening of Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, the largest German offensive in the West since 1940. Adolf Hitler himself has planned this attack, overruling his generals, gambling everything on one desperate throw of the dice. The objective is nothing less than to split the British and American armies, recapture the port of Antwerp, and force the Western Allies into a negotiated peace that will allow Germany to concentrate all resources on the Eastern Front. Manhay is not yet mentioned in these grand plans, but within days, it will become the point where Hitler's vision collides with reality. The plan is born 4 weeks earlier in Hitler's headquarters, the Adlerhorst, Eagle's Nest, near Frankfurt. On December 12th, the Führer personally briefs his senior commanders on Operation Herbstnebel, Autumn Fog, the code name that will later change to Watch on the Rhine. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of all German forces in the West, and Field Marshal Walter Model, commander of Army Group B, sit through this briefing knowing that what Hitler proposes is impossible. The plan calls for 3 armies totaling 200,000 men, 1,000 tanks, and 2,000 artillery pieces to smash through American positions in the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, and reach Antwerp 150 miles away, all within 7 to 10 days before Allied air power can respond. Von Rundstedt, a professional soldier of the old school, believes the plan is madness. Model, more willing to believe in Nazi willpower, thinks it might succeed if everything goes perfectly. Neither man dares say what both know. Nothing in war goes perfectly, especially not when Germany is already losing. But Hitler is beyond rational argument by December 1944. The July assassination attempt has left him paranoid and increasingly detached from reality. He sees the Ardennes offensive not as a desperate gamble, but as a replay of 1940, when German armor smashed through these same forests and conquered France in 6 weeks. He ignores critical differences. Then, Germany held the initiative in vastly superior forces. Now the Wehrmacht is outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of everything from fuel to ammunition to trained replacements. The fuel situation is particularly critical. German logistics officers calculate that the attacking forces have enough fuel to advance approximately 100 kilometers, about 60 miles. To reach Antwerp at 150 miles, they must capture American fuel dumps along the way. The entire operation depends on taking enemy supplies before the enemy can destroy them. Von Rundstedt calls this driving to Antwerp on enemy gasoline. Hitler calls it operational flexibility. The force Hitler assembles for this offensive represents nearly everything Germany has looped. The 6th SS Panzer Army under Josef Sepp Dietrich, Hitler's old bodyguard and a fanatical Nazi, will spearhead the northern thrust. The 5th Panzer Army under Hasso von Manteuffel, a skilled tactician, will strike in the center. The 7th Army under Erich Brandenberger will protect the southern flank. Among these forces are some of Germany's most elite units. The 1st S Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, the 12th S Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, and the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich. These are not ordinary Wehrmacht formations. They are ideological warriors, volunteers who believe in Nazi racial theories, veterans who have fought with savage effectiveness from Poland to the gates of Moscow. They are also, by December 1944, units that have committed systematic atrocities on both the eastern and western fronts. The presence of these SS divisions in the offensive is not accidental. Hitler wants units that will fight with absolute ruthlessness, that will not hesitate, that will terrorize the Americans into collapse. The Americans in the Ardennes have no idea what is about to hit them. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower has declared this sector a quiet area, a place where new divisions can gain experience and exhausted divisions can rest after heavy fighting elsewhere. The American units holding the Ardennes are spread thin, approximately 80,000 men across the same 85 miles that the Germans will attack with 200,000. Intelligence officers have noted a German buildup, but higher headquarters dismisses these reports. Germany is finished, the analysts say, incapable of major offensive operations. The Siegfried Line is broken. The Rhine will be crossed by spring. The war will be over by summer. This confidence is not entirely misplaced. Germany is losing the war. But losing and finished are not the same thing, and the Americans are about to learn the difference. When the attack begins on December 16th, Allied command reacts with confusion and disbelief. Initial reports are fragmentary and contradictory. Some units report heavy artillery but no ground attack. Others report being overrun by tanks they did not know the Germans still possessed. Communications break down as German commandos in American uniforms cut telephone wires and redirect traffic. English-speaking German infiltrators spread false orders and panic. By the end of the first day, the American front line has been penetrated in multiple places, but no one at headquarters can get a clear picture of what is happening. Eisenhower's intelligence chief, British Major General Kenneth Strong, studies the reports and makes a bold call. This is not a local counterattack. This is a major offensive. Eisenhower, to his credit, believes him immediately and begins shifting reserves toward the Ardennes. But it will take days for those reserves to arrive, and days are exactly what the Germans need. The German advance in the first 72 hours is impressive by the standards of late 1944. Kampfgruppe Piper, a battle group of the 1st SS Panzer Division under Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Piper, penetrates 40 miles in 2 days, the deepest advance of the offensive. But the advance is not fast enough, and it comes at terrible cost. On December 17th, Piper's men massacre 84 American prisoners at Malmedy Crossroads, machine gunning them in a field. This atrocity will harden American resistance everywhere, as word spreads that the SS is taking no prisoners. More critically, Piper's spearhead runs out of fuel on December 19th, just 30 miles from the Meuse River. His tanks sit immobile, useless tons of steel, as American forces surround him. He will eventually abandon his vehicles and escape on foot, but his failure to reach the Meuse dooms the northern thrust of the offensive. By December 20th, German commanders realize they are behind schedule, critically behind schedule. The weather that has grounded Allied aircraft cannot last forever. The Americans are rushing reinforcements from all directions. The carefully planned timetable is collapsing. At this point, the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, which has been held in reserve, receives new orders: break through in the center, head northwest, capture the Crossroads towns that will allow a continued advance toward the Meuse. The list of objectives includes several turnings that mean nothing to most people, but everything to military planners. Houffalize, Samray, Manhay. These are not cities or strategic positions in themselves. They are simply places where roads meet, where an army can move in multiple directions, where the next phase of advance becomes possible. Among them, Manhay stands out on the map for one reason. It is the junction where the roads from 3 different valleys converge before opening into the flat country that leads to the Meuse. Hugo Cross, the colonel commanding the 2nd SS Panzer Division, receives these orders with grim determination. He knows his division, he knows what it has done in the past, what it is capable of doing now. At Oradour-sur-Glane in France, his men burned 600 civilians alive in a church. On the Eastern Front, they participated in anti-partisan operations that were barely disguised massacres of civilians. They are not soldiers in the conventional sense. They are instruments of Nazi ideology, willing to commit any act if it advances the cause. Cross looks at the map and sees Manhay, a small village, lightly defended according to reconnaissance, vulnerable to night attack. He issues orders to his tank commanders and assault infantry. Take Manhay. Use any means necessary. Do not stop for prisoners. Do not stop for civilians. The road to the Meuse runs through that crossroads, and we will take it no matter the cost. The 2nd SS Panzer Division begins moving north on December 21st, grinding through snow-covered forests on narrow roads never meant for armor. They are slowed by American resistance at half a dozen nameless crossroads, by fuel shortages that force them to cannibalize disabled vehicles, by the simple friction of moving a mechanized division through winter terrain. But they keep coming. By December 23rd, reconnaissance elements reach positions where they can observe Manhay with binoculars. They count American tanks, estimate infantry strength, note the positions of anti-tank guns. The reports go back to Cross. The Americans are weak, disorganized, vulnerable. The village can be taken in a night attack if we strike before they can reinforce. Cross studies these reports and makes his decision. Christmas Eve, he tells his officers, we attack on Christmas Eve. The Americans will be celebrating, their guard will be down, and we will hit them with everything we have. By Christmas morning, Manhay's Hall will be ours, and the road to the Meuse will be open. December 21st, 1944, 1400 hours. A Panther tank of the 2nd SS Panzer Division grinds to a halt on a forest road somewhere south of Manhay. Inside the turret, SS Sturmbannführer Ernst Krag checks the fuel gauge and curses. Less than a quarter tank remaining, maybe 50 kilometers if they are careful, less if they encounter resistance. This is the reality of Germany's last offensive. The tanks are magnificent, the crews are veterans, but they are running on fumes. Krag keys the radio and reports to his company commander. The response is curt. Siphon fuel from the half-tracks, continue north. Manhay must be reached by nightfall tomorrow. Krag relays the order to his crew. They have done this before, stealing fuel from their own vehicles, cannibalizing mobility to keep the panzers moving. It is a mathematics of diminishing returns, but no one speaks this truth aloud. The 2nd SS Panzer. Division des Reich is one of the most notorious formations in the German military, a history written in blood across Europe from France to the Ukraine. Formed in 1939 from the SS Verfügungstruppe, the armed SS units directly loyal to Hitler, Das Reich fought in the French campaign, the Balkans invasion, and then participated in Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. On the Eastern Front, Das Reich gained a reputation for tactical excellence and absolute ruthlessness. They participated in the siege of Moscow, the recapture of Kharkov, the Battle of Kursk. They also participated in Einsatzgruppen operations, the mobile killing squads that murdered Jews, communists, and anyone the Nazis deemed subhuman. By 1944, Das Reich veterans have killed more people than most soldiers will see in a lifetime, and many of those killed were unarmed civilians. The division's most infamous crime occurred just 6 months before the Ardennes Offensive. In June 1944, as Das Reich moved north through France to counter the Normandy invasion, resistance fighters ambushed and killed one of their officers. In retaliation, the division surrounded the village of Oradour-sur-Glane on June 10th. SS troops herded all 642 inhabitants, men, women, and children, into the church and barns. They machine-gunned the men, then set fire to the buildings where the women and children were trapped. Those who tried to escape the flames were shot. Only 6 people survived. The massacre was not an aberration or the action of rogue soldiers. It was systematic, ordered, and carried out by multiple companies of the division. When questioned later, Das Reich officers showed no remorse. "This is war," they said. "This is what happens to those who resist the Reich." Now this same division approaches Manhay, and the men who massacred Oradour are commanding the tanks and assault units. Hugo Krass, the division commander, holds the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, one of Nazi Germany's highest military decorations. He earned it on the Eastern Front for aggressive armor tactics and unflinching brutality. His subordinate commanders are cut from the same cloth, veterans who learn combined arms warfare fighting Soviet tank armies, men who consider mercy a weakness and civilians merely obstacles. They command approximately 15,000 men, though frontline combat strength is lower after weeks of fighting in the Bulge. The tank force numbers around 60 operational Panthers and Panzer IVs, formidable machines that outclass American Shermans in nearly every technical category except reliability and ease of repair. The Panther tank that Ernst Krag commands is a perfect example of German technical excellence and strategic failure. The Panther ASFG weighs 45 tons and mounts a long-barreled 75mm KWK-42 gun that can penetrate 138mm of armor at 1,000 meters. Its own frontal armor is 120mm thick, sloped at 55 degrees for maximum effectiveness. Against the American Sherman, which has only 76mm of frontal armor and a lower velocity 75mm gun, the Panther is vastly superior. A Panther can destroy a Sherman at ranges beyond 1,500 meters, while the Sherman must close to within 500 meters and hit the Panther's thinner side or rear armor to have any hope of a kill. In a one-on-one fight between skilled crews on open ground, the Sherman loses every time. But tank warfare is not one-on-one fights on open ground, and German technical superiority cannot overcome fundamental strategic weaknesses. The Panther is mechanically complex and breaks down frequently. It consumes fuel at an alarming rate, 300 liters per 100 kilometers under ideal conditions, more in the snow and mud of the Ardennes. Most critically, there are not enough of them. By December 1944, Germany has produced approximately 6,000 Panthers total since their introduction in 1943. The United States has produced 50,000 Shermans. The Germans can win individual tank battles, but lose the larger war of attrition because the Americans can replace losses and the Germans cannot. Krag knows this mathematics, even if he does not speak it. He has seen too many of his comrades die in superior tanks that ran out of fuel or ammunition or were simply overwhelmed by numbers. The advance toward Manhay is grinding and frustrating. The roads are narrow, winding, and covered with ice. The Panthers must move in single file, vulnerable to ambush at every turn. American resistance is scattered but effective. A squad with a bazooka can halt an entire column while engineers blow bridges behind them. Das Reich leaves a trail of burning villages and shot prisoners, not because they face significant resistance, but because terror is their doctrine. On December 22nd, they capture a group of 12 American soldiers from an outpost. Rather than take them to the rear as prisoners, the SS troops machine gun them beside the road and continue north. The murders are not even noteworthy to the veterans, just another day in the war they have been fighting for 5 years. By December 23rd, reconnaissance elements reach positions overlooking Manhay. Through field glasses, SS officers observe the American dispositions, perhaps 18 tanks, scattered infantry in foxholes, anti-tank guns at the Crossroads. They watch American soldiers moving about the village, seemingly unaware of the danger approaching. The SS officers make notes, sketch maps, identify key targets. They see the church steeple that can serve as an observation post, the stone houses that can provide cover for infantry, the open ground to the south where American defenses appear weakest. They observe for 6 hours, rotating observers, gathering every detail. Then they withdraw silently and report to Cross. Manhay is vulnerable to night attack. The Americans are weak and disorganized. We can take it in one assault if we strike hard and fast. Cross issues his operations order that evening. The attack will begin at 2300 hours on December 24th, Christmas Eve. The timing is deliberate. The Americans will be distracted by their holiday, perhaps drinking, certainly less alert than usual. The assault will be led by 25 Panthers supported by 15 Panzer IVs, with 500 SS infantry and half-tracks following close behind. There will be no preliminary artillery barrage that might give warning. Instead, the panzers will advance without lights, using their superior night optics to navigate, and hit the American positions before they can react. The objective is simple: seize the crossroads, destroy all resistance, and establish a defensive perimeter before dawn. Speed and violence of action will overcome American numbers. Any prisoners will be dealt with as circumstances permit, which is SS code for expect no mercy. The SS troops prepare for battle with the efficiency of veterans. Tank crews check mechanical systems, load ammunition, top off fuel tanks with every liter they can scavenge. Infantry clean weapons, sharpen knives, prepare grenades for close combat in village streets. Officers brief their men on the attack plan, emphasizing speed and ruthlessness. The Americans are soft, one company commander tells his soldiers. They have not faced us before. When they see the death's head on our collars, they will break. It is propaganda, but propaganda based on some truth. The SS has cultivated a reputation for invincibility, and that reputation is itself a weapon. The soldiers of Das Reich believe they are superior to their enemies, not just in training or equipment, but in will and racial character. This belief makes them dangerous beyond their actual capabilities. As darkness falls on December 23rd, the temperature drops to -15 Celsius. The SS assault force moves into final attack positions, engines idling quietly, exhaust freezing in the air. Inside the tanks, crews wait in silence. Some smoke cigarettes, cupping the glow so it cannot be seen from outside. Some check family photos carried in breast pockets, though most SS soldiers claim they have no sentiment for such things. Some simply stare at the darkness ahead, thinking about the violence to come. They are not nervous, most of them. They have done this too many times before, in Poland, in Russia, in France. They have attacked at night, they have killed enemies and civilians, they have seen friends die and kept fighting. They are professionals of a savage kind, experts in a brutal craft. And now they point that expertise toward Manhay, where American soldiers are settling down for Christmas Eve, unaware that Germany's most ruthless division is less than 5 kilometers away and closing. December 24th, 1944, 0600 hours. Major General Matthew Ridgway sits in his 18th Airborne Corps headquarters reading 3 different sets of orders that contradict each other completely. The first, from 1st Army, instructs him to withdraw all forces from advanced positions to shorten the defensive line. The second, from his immediate superior at 12th Army Group, tells him to hold current positions at all costs. The third, just arrived by courier because radio communications are jammed, orders him to prepare a counterattack towards Saint-Vith. Ridgway, a hard-driving combat commander who jumped into Normandy with the 82nd Airborne, knows that trying to execute all 3 orders simultaneously is impossible. He must choose, but choosing means defying someone, and in the military bureaucracy of late 1944, defying the wrong someone can end a career even faster than losing a battle. The command structure in the Ardennes has become a nightmare of competing authorities and unclear responsibilities. When the German offensive began 8 days ago, it shattered not just the American front line, but the entire command organization behind it. Units were overrun, headquarters evacuated, communications cut. In the chaos, divisions reported to multiple corps. Corps received orders from multiple armies, and nobody had a clear picture of where friendly forces actually were. On December 20th, in a controversial decision that still rankles American pride, Supreme Commander Eisenhower placed all Allied forces north of the German penetration under temporary command of British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. The idea was to simplify command arrangements, but in practice it added another layer of confusion. Now, American Corps commanders like Ridgway report to British officers who report to American generals who report back to Eisenhower. The chain of command resembles a tangled knot more than a clear line. The communications breakdown is making everything worse. Field telephone lines, the most reliable form of command communication, are being cut faster than Signal Corps engineers can repair them. German infiltrators in American uniforms specifically target communications wire, knowing that cutting a division off from higher headquarters is as effective as destroying it in battle. Radio communications are sporadic at best. The same atmospheric conditions that bring freezing fog and low clouds also create strange propagation effects that make radio signals bounce unpredictably. A battalion commander trying to call his regimental headquarters might find his transmission reaching a corps headquarters 50 miles away instead, or reaching nobody at all. Critical messages take 4 to 6 hours to reach their destinations, by which time the situation they describe has changed completely. Couriers carrying written orders are sometimes killed by German patrols or simply get lost in the featureless snow-covered forests. At Manhay specifically, the command confusion is acute. The 7th Armored Division, defending the Crossroads, technically reports to Ridgway's 18th Airborne Corps, but until 48 hours ago, it was under different command entirely. The division commander, Brigadier General Robert Hasbrouck, is exhausted and increasingly bitter after the fight at Saint-Vith, where he believes his division was sacrificed to buy time for others to escape. Now he receives orders from Ridgway that he knows are based on outdated intelligence and unrealistic assumptions about his division's combat strength. Ridgway thinks Hasbrouck commands a coherent armored division of 10 to 12,000 men. The reality is closer to 3,000 effectives, many of them headquarters personnel, and support troops pressed into infantry roles for which they are untrained. The situation becomes more complicated because other units are moving into the Manhay sector without clear coordination. The 82nd Airborne Division holds positions to the east, but exactly where their lines end and the 7th Armored Division's lines begin is unclear. British 30th Corps is somewhere to the west, but communication between British and American forces is limited by different radio equipment, different code systems, and simple national pride that makes asking for help difficult. When Hasbrouck tries to coordinate with the 82nd Airborne about mutual support, he discovers that the paratroopers are receiving different orders from their own chain of command. Everyone is supposed to be defending the same line, but nobody agrees on where that line actually is or what defending it means. Intelligence makes the confusion worse. Ultra intercepts, the top-secret decryptions of German communications that have given the Allies enormous advantage throughout the war, are providing good strategic intelligence about German intentions. By December 24th, Allied intelligence knows that major SS Panzer divisions are moving north toward the Manhay-Mattered sector. They know the Germans are desperately short of fuel and must capture Allied supplies to continue their advance. They know Hitler has personally ordered that the offensive continue regardless of cost. All of this information exists at Supreme Headquarters. Almost none of it reaches the soldiers at Manhay in time to matter. The intelligence must be sanitized to protect the ultra-secret, then transmitted through multiple headquarters, each of which adds its own analysis and delay. By the time sanitized intelligence reaches Hasbrouck, it is 18 to 24 hours old and phrased so vaguely to protect sources that it is nearly useless. The situation deteriorates throughout December 24th. Ridgway tries to visit Hasbrouck's headquarters to clarify orders personally, but his jeep bogs down in snow-choked roads and he must turn back. A staff officer sent as courier gets lost and does not arrive until late afternoon, by which time the orders he carries are obsolete. Hasbrouck sends repeated requests for permission to withdraw to better defensive positions, arguing that Manhay is vulnerable to envelopment from 3 directions. Ridgway denies these requests, not because he wants Hasbrouck to hold at all costs, but because higher headquarters has told him that withdrawal would expose other units to encirclement. Neither commander has accurate information about what other units actually exist in positions that would be exposed. They are making life-and-death decisions based on maps that show unit positions from 2 days ago. At 1800 hours, 6 hours before the German attack will begin, a fragmentary order finally arrives at Manhay, authorizing a limited withdrawal to prepared positions 3 kilometers north. But the order is unclear about timing, about what prepared positions means when nobody has had time to prepare anything, and about which route the withdrawal should take. Hasbrouck's staff tries to call Ridgway's headquarters for clarification. The telephone lines are dead. They try radio. Atmospheric conditions make communication impossible. They send a courier, but he must travel through potentially German-held territory on roads that may or may not be passable. By the time this confusion is resolved, the staff officers know it will likely be too late to execute any withdrawal in an organized fashion. They are trapped by the fog of war, unable to see clearly, unable to communicate effectively, unable to make decisions based on current reality. The soldiers at Manhay know none of these command-level complications. They know only that officers seem uncertain, that orders keep changing, that the promised reinforcements never arrive. Some units are told to prepare to withdraw but then told to remain in place. Others are told to expect relief, but the relief never comes. The tank crews sit in their Shermans wondering if they will fight or retreat, knowing that the decision will probably come too late either way. The infantry in their foxholes hear conflicting rumors. They are surrounded. They are being withdrawn. Massive reinforcements are coming. They have been abandoned. In the absence of clear information, fear fills the vacuum. Some men write final letters home, just in case. Some pray. Some simply wait, knowing that in a few hours the confusion will be resolved one way or another, either by clear orders or by German tanks making the decision irrelevant. Command confusion kills soldiers as surely as enemy fire, though it gets less blame in histories. When communications break down, when orders contradict, when nobody knows who is in charge or what the plan is, units fight in isolation without support or coordination. Mistakes multiply. Opportunities are missed. Disasters that could be prevented become inevitable. At Manhay on Christmas Eve 1944, all the ingredients for disaster are present. Exhausted troops, unclear orders, broken communications, overconfident enemies approaching, and commanders at multiple levels making decisions based on information that is hours out of date or simply wrong. The machine of military command, which works reasonably well under normal circumstances, has broken down under the stress of the German offensive. And into this breakdown, the 2nd SS Panzer Division is about to strike with the kind of violence that does not care about command confusion, that simply overwhelms disorganized defenders and drives through their position before they can react. The Americans at Manhay have brave men and decent equipment. What they lack is the one thing they need most: clear knowledge of what is coming and a coherent plan to meet it. December 23rd, 1944, 1500 hours. Marie Bodson stands at her kitchen window, watching American soldiers dig foxholes in her frozen garden. The soldiers are young, too young, and they work with the exhausted slowness of men who have been digging foxholes for days. Her husband Jacques stands beside her, his arm around their daughter Annette, who is 8 years old and does not understand why the Americans look so frightened. They are just tired, Jacques tells her in French, but Marie sees the look he gives her over their daughter's head. He knows. She knows. The Germans are coming back. 4 years of occupation, 4 months of liberation, and now the nightmare will begin again. The Bodson family is one of approximately 200 Belgian civilians still in Manhay village when the battle begins. They are not refugees, not yet. This is their home, their land, their country. Marie's family has farmed these hills for 6 generations. Her grandfather remembered when German troops marched through in the First World War. Her father remembered the occupation that followed, 4 years when Belgian farmers were forced to feed the German army while their own children starved. Now it is happening again, and Marie must decide: stay in the cellar and hope the house survives the fighting, or flee into the frozen forest with a child and elderly parents and hope they survive the journey. Neither choice is good. Both might be fatal. This is what civilians face when armies turn their homes into battlefields. The decision to stay or flee divides families throughout Manhay. The younger families, those with children, mostly choose to leave. They pack what they can carry, say quick prayers in the village church, and head north on foot toward Allied lines. But the roads are clogged with American military traffic, and the forest is full of German patrols. Some families make it to safety. Others are caught in crossfire between advanced patrols or simply vanish into the winter landscape, their fate unknown. The older residents, those like Marie's parents who remember the last war, mostly choose to stay. "We survived 1914, her father says stubbornly. "We survived 4 years of occupation. We will survive this." He says it with confidence, but Marie sees him looking at the crucifix on the wall, his lips moving in silent prayer. Jacques Bodson is 42 years old, too old for military service but young enough to have been pressed into forced labor during the occupation. For 4 years he worked in German factories, came home when he could, watched his children grow up in a world where swastikas flew from the town hall, and Wehrmacht soldiers bought cheese in his wife's shop with occupation currency. When the Americans liberated Manhay in September, Jacques wept. He thought the nightmare was over. He thought his children would grow up free. Now, as he watches American soldiers prepare defensive positions in his village, he realizes the nightmare is only changing shape. The Americans seem kind enough. They pay for food when they can. They share chocolate with the children. But kindness does not stop artillery shells. The Belgian resistance in Manhay is small but active. Jacques is not officially a member. Official membership in occupied Belgium is a death sentence. But he has done small things. Passed information about German movements, hidden radios and weapons, helped Allied airmen escape to Spain through underground networks. Now, with the Germans approaching again, the resistance members face terrible choices. If they stay and fight, they and their families will be executed if the Germans take the village. If they flee, they abandon their homes and their neighbors. A few choose to stay and help the Americans. One of them, a farmer named Jules Lemaire, knows every forest path and back road within 10 kilometers. On the night of December 23rd, he guides an American reconnaissance patrol through the woods south of Manhay, showing them where German forces are concentrating. The patrol reports this information back to headquarters. Whether anyone listens is another question. Christmas Eve in the Bodson cellar is unlike any Christmas Marie has ever known. The family huddles around a small stove, trying to conserve the coal that must last through winter. Above them, they hear American soldiers moving through the house, setting up a machine gun position in the attic. The Americans apologize for the intrusion, for the noise, for the danger they bring. They offer food from their rations, terrible coffee, and something called spam that makes Jacques' stomach turn. But the intent is kind, and Marie accepts the coffee gratefully. Her daughter Annette thinks the American soldiers are exciting, asks them about America, about cowboys and Indians, about movies she has heard about but never seen. The soldiers answer patiently, showing her pictures of their own families, their own children who are maybe Annette's age. For a few moments, the war seems distant. Then the shelling begins. It is not close at first, just a low rumble to the south, like distant thunder, but it grows closer, louder. The house shakes. Plaster dust falls from the ceiling. Annette begins to cry, burying her face in her mother's coat. The American soldiers upstairs stop talking, stop moving. Everyone is listening now, trying to judge distance by sound, trying to determine if the next shell will be the one that hits this house, this room, this family. Marie holds her daughter and prays in French, the old prayers her mother taught her, prayers that feel inadequate against the mathematics of high, explosive, and steel. Her husband sits with his back against the cellar wall, his face gray in the lamplight. He has survived 4 years of occupation, but he has never been in a battle before. Nobody in this cellar, except possibly the Americans, has experienced what is about to happen. The cellar becomes their world. Hours pass, measured not by clocks, but by the intensity of the artillery, by the small sounds that indicate what is happening above. At one point they hear shouting in English, running footsteps, the staccato bark of machine guns. Jacques wants to go upstairs to see, but Marie grabs his arm. "No," she says simply. They stay below, listening to their house being used as a fortress, listening to men dying in their attic, in their kitchen, in their garden where tomatoes grew last summer. The small oil lamp flickers. Annette asks if she can go to sleep. Marie says yes, and somehow, impossibly, the child does sleep, curled against her mother's side, while the battle rages overhead. Morning comes on December 26th, and the sounds of battle have moved north. The Bodsons wait in the cellar, not knowing if Germans or Americans control the village, not knowing if emerging will get them shot by nervous soldiers. Finally, Jacques risks going up the stairs. The house is damaged but standing. The kitchen has a hole in the ceiling, where a shell came through, but did not explode, a miracle that saved them all. The machine gun nest in the attic is abandoned, shell casings covering the floor. In the garden, American and German soldiers lie dead together, frozen in the positions where they fell. Jacques counts 11 bodies, cannot tell which side is which in the snow and blood. He goes back down to the cellar and tells his wife, "The Americans are gone. I do not know who won." The Belgian civilians who survived the Battle of Manhay will remember it longer than the soldiers who fought there. For the soldiers, Manhay is one battle among many, a piece of a larger war, a name on a casualty list. For the Belgians, it is the place where their homes were destroyed, where their neighbors died, where their children learned that the world is not safe and freedom is not permanent. 23 Belgian civilians are killed during the 3 days of fighting, some by German fire, some by American, some by causes that will never be determined. 14 homes are completely destroyed, another 32 damaged beyond immediate repair. After the battle, families like the Bodsons will dig graves in the frozen ground, bury their dead, and try to rebuild. The armies will move on. The war will continue. But for the Belgians of Manhay, the war will never really end, just change into a different kind of struggle. The struggle to remember, to rebuild, to explain to children like Annette why Christmas Eve 1944 was the night the world ended and began again. December 24th, 1944, 1500 hours. Lieutenant James Grimball crouches in the turret of his Sherman tank, scanning the tree line 800 meters to the south through his periscope. The afternoon light is fading fast, and the freezing fog makes everything beyond 500 meters look like ghosts. Grimball commands a platoon of 5 Shermans from the 3rd Armored Division, rushed to Manhay just 12 hours ago to reinforce the battered 7th Armored. His crew is experienced. They fought across France from Normandy to the German border. They know their tank and they know their business. But they also know the rumors about German Panthers, and every tanker in the European theater knows that in a straight fight, the Sherman loses. The Sherman M4A3 that Grimball commands represents the best and worst of American tank design philosophy. It weighs 33 tons, significantly lighter than the German Panther's 45 tons. Its main armament is a 75mm M3 gun, adequate against most German armor from the side or rear, but marginal against frontal armor. The tank's own protection is modest, 76mm of armor on the front hull, sloped at 56 degrees for improved effectiveness, but still vulnerable to every German anti-tank weapon in service. The Sherman's advantages are mobility. It can reach 30 miles per hour on roads and maneuver in terrain that bogs down heavier tanks. And reliability, the engine is a radial aircraft design that runs on common gasoline and rarely breaks down. Most importantly, there are thousands of Shermans. America can afford losses that would cripple the German army. Inside the cramped turret, Grimball's crew goes through the familiar routine of preparing for combat. The gunner, Sergeant Frank Morrison, checks the hydraulic turret traverse one more time, making sure it rotates smoothly. The loader, Private Eddie Kowalski, organizes ammunition in the ready rack, placing armor-piercing rounds where he can grab them instantly. The assistant driver bow gunner, Private Bobby Chen, cleans the .30 caliber machine gun for the third time today, knowing that keeping it functional might save their lives in close combat. Below in the hull, the driver, Corporal Dave Martinez, checks oil pressure and coolant temperature, the routine maintenance that keeps machines running in sub-zero weather. They do not talk much. They have fought together for 6 months, long enough to communicate in grunts and gestures, long enough to trust each other with their lives. At 15:30 hours, Grimball sees movement in the tree line. He keys the radio to report, but before he can speak, the woods erupt with muzzle flashes. German tanks, at least 3, maybe more, emerging from the forest in line. Grimball's training takes over. Gunner, armor piercing, tank, 800 meters, traverse right, on the big one. Morrison already has the target in his sight, the distinctive long barrel and sloped armor of a Panther. He fires. The 75mm gun roars. The whole tank rocks backward from the recoil. Through the smoke, Grimball sees the tracer arc toward the Panther, watches it strike the frontal armor, watches it ricochet away without penetrating. "No effect," he shouts. "Load he! Buttoned up!" The crew knows what that means. They cannot hurt the Panther from this angle. They need to reposition or die. The German return fire comes seconds later. The Panther's 75mm Koki 42 gun has a muzzle velocity of 1,000 meters per second, nearly twice the Sherman's velocity. The shell crosses the distance in less than a second. Grimball hears a sound like God's hammer striking an anvil, and the tank next to his, commanded by Sergeant Thomas Riley, simply explodes. The German armor-piercing round penetrates the Sherman's frontal armor, detonates the ammunition stored in the hull, and the entire tank erupts in orange flame. Grimball sees the top of Riley's turret blow off, spinning through the air trailing smoke. He knows, with sick certainty, that all 5 men inside are dead or dying. There is no time to help them, no time to grieve. "Driver, reverse! Get us behind that building, now!" Martinez guns the engine, and the Sherman lurches backward, tracks churning through snow. Another German round screams past where they were seconds before, hits a stone wall, and explodes in a shower of fragments. Grimball's tank makes it behind a farm building, just as a third round hits, punching through the building's stone wall, but missing the tank. They have survived the first exchange, but barely. Grimball knows the mathematics of this fight. The Panthers can kill his Shermans at 1,500 meters, while his 75mm gun is only effective against Panther side or rear armor at ranges under 500 meters. In a stand-up fight on open ground, the Germans win every single time. American tank doctrine accepts this and compensates with tactics. Use terrain for cover, maneuver to get side shots, attack from multiple directions simultaneously, accept casualties to overwhelm superior vehicles with numbers. Over the radio, Grimball hears his company commander ordering the classic American tank tactic. All units, spread out, flank them, get on their sides, fire, and move. 5 Shermans maneuver to engage 3 Panthers, accepting that 2 or 3 Shermans will probably be destroyed, but betting that the survivors can destroy the Panthers. It is brutal mathematics, trading American lives for German steel, but it is the only mathematics that works when your tanks are inferior. Grimball maneuvers his Sherman through the village streets, using buildings for cover, trying to get an angle on the Panther's flanks. He passes another burning Sherman, sees a crewman crawling away trailing flames, cannot stop to help. The battle has become chaos. Tanks firing from point-blank range, infantry with bazookas engaging from buildings, smoke and fog reducing visibility to meters. Grimball gets his shot at 1600 hours. A Panther, focused on engaging another Sherman, exposes its side as it turns. Morrison has maybe 3 seconds before the Panther rotates its turret. Side shot! Fire! The 75mm armor-piercing round hits the Panther's side armor at 300 meters, penetrates, and detonates inside the crew compartment. The Panther shudders, stops moving, smoke pours from the hatches. Grimball sees German crew scrambling out, their uniforms on fire, one man missing his arm. His bowgunner opens up with the .30 caliber, cutting down 2 of them before they reach cover. It is not mercy, it is war. Those crewmen would do the same to Americans given the chance. In fact, as Grimball knows from intelligence briefings, SS crews sometimes do worse, executing tank crews who try to surrender. The fight at Manhay on December 24th is not one battle, but dozens of small engagements as American and German armor clash throughout the afternoon. The Americans have numerical superiority, approximately 40 operational Shermans versus 25 German tanks, a mix of Panthers and the older Panzer IV model. But German tactical skill and technical superiority narrow that advantage significantly. By the time darkness falls, the Americans have lost 6 Shermans destroyed completely and 4 more damaged and withdrawn. The Germans have lost 3 Panthers and 2 Panzer IVs, a ratio of 2 American tanks destroyed for each German loss. By these numbers, the Germans are winning, but the Americans still have 30 operational tanks, while the Germans are down to 20. The mathematics of attrition favor the side that can afford losses. Inside the surviving tanks, exhausted crews prepare for the next phase, night fighting. Grimball's crew has been in their tank for 9 hours straight, breathing diesel fumes and cordite smoke, ears ringing from the main gun firing in the confined turret. They are filthy, covered in powder residue and grease, sweating despite the cold from the adrenaline and the heat of the engine. Kowalski, the loader, has a bruised shoulder from the recoil of the gun breech, a common injury that he ignores. Morrison's eyes are bloodshot from staring through the sight. Martinez's hands shake slightly from hours of fine control on the driving levers. They pass around a canteen of water that tastes like metal, eat K rations without tasting them, try to stay alert for the next attack. As darkness falls completely, Grimball receives orders for what every tanker dreads: night defense. The crew will remain in the tank, engine idling to prevent freezing, rotating 2-hour watches. The night vision periscopes are nearly useless in this weather, and German tanks have superior optics that give them an advantage in darkness. American doctrine says to withdraw tanks behind infantry at night, let the infantry handle close defense, bring tanks forward at dawn. But Manhay does not have enough infantry to form a continuous line, and someone must watch the southern approaches. So, the tanks stay forward, blind in the darkness, waiting for an attack they will hear before they see. Grimball lights a cigarette, his hand shaking slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion and adrenaline come down. Riley is dead, along with 4 other tankers from his company. Tomorrow there will be more. This is the calculus of armored warfare in late 1944. Every day you survive is a day closer to going home, and every day brings new chances to die in a burning steel coffin. December 24th, 1944, 2300 hours. The night is absolute. Freezing fog has thickened into a wall that swallows light, sound, sense itself. American sentries at the southern perimeter of Manhay strain to see movement in the darkness, knowing that the Germans prefer to attack at night, knowing that visibility is reduced to arm's length. Private Joseph Martin huddles in his foxhole, his M1 rifle across his knees, trying to distinguish between the natural sounds of winter forest and the sounds of approaching enemy. Every branch creaking under snow load sounds like a footstep. Every gust of wind sounds like whispered German commands. His watch shows 23:15, 45 minutes until midnight, 45 minutes until Christmas Day. He wonders if he will live to see it. The German assault begins without warning, without preliminary bombardment, without any of the normal indicators that allow defenders to brace for impact. The 2nd SS Panzer Division has learned sophisticated night attack techniques on the Eastern Front, where Soviet armies conducted operations in total darkness as a matter of routine. The Panthers advance with engines throttled down, using terrain to mask their sound, navigating by compass and memorized routes from the afternoon reconnaissance. They do not turn on headlights or fire flares. They simply come forward through the darkness like blind predators, using hearing and training to guide them toward the American positions. The first indication of attack is not visual, but oral. The grinding roar of tank engines suddenly very close, too close, already inside the defensive perimeter. Martin hears them, and his blood turns to ice. Tanks, multiple tanks, their engines roaring as they accelerate for the final rush. He fires his rifle blindly toward the sound, knowing the 8mm bullets cannot hurt armor, but needing to do something, anything. Around him, other American soldiers are firing too, tracers arcing into the darkness, revealing nothing but fog and snow. Then the first Panther emerges from the darkness like a prehistoric monster, its long gun barrel sweeping toward Martin's foxhole. He throws himself flat as the machine guns on the tank's hull open fire, 30 caliber rounds chewing through the frozen earth above him. The Panther passes so close he can feel the heat from its exhaust, can hear German voices inside shouting commands he does not understand. Then it is past him, driving deeper into the village, and Martin realizes with horror that the first line of defense has been overrun before it could fire a shot. The American forward outpost, a reinforced squad occupying 3 foxholes on the southern edge of Manhay, simply ceases to exist. The radio man, Corporal Frank Hughes, tries to send a warning back to headquarters. Panzers, Panzers, right on top. His transmission ends abruptly, cut off not by radio failure, but by death. A Panther drives directly over one of the foxholes, its 45 tons crushing the position and everyone in it. SS infantry following behind the tanks finish off the survivors with submachine gun bursts and grenades. The entire action takes perhaps 90 seconds. 12 American soldiers die without inflicting a single casualty on the attackers. This is what happens when elite troops using night fighting doctrine hit unprepared defenders. Not a battle, but a massacre. Inside Manhay village, confusion reigns. American soldiers wake to the sound of tank engines, stumble from houses where they were sleeping, try to understand what is happening in the darkness. Officers shout contradictory orders. Tank crews scramble to man their vehicles, knowing they are vulnerable if caught while dismounted. The carefully prepared defense plan, which assumes the Germans will attack from the south in daylight, becomes useless when Panthers appear from the darkness already inside the perimeter. Company commanders try to call the battalion headquarters for orders, for artillery support, for anything. Some phone lines are already cut. Some radio frequencies are jammed. Some messages get through but arrive garbled and incomplete. The fog of war, already thick, becomes impenetrable in literal fog and darkness. Lieutenant Grimball, sleeping in his tank with his crew, wakes to the sound of German engines and knows immediately what is happening. Start engine, gunner load armor piercing, driver be ready to move. His crew responds instantly, the product of 6 months of combat together. But in the darkness, without targets, without clear fields of fire, the Sherman is as blind as the Americans in foxholes. Grimball tries to make sense of the chaos around him. Muzzle flashes indicate fighting to his south. Explosions, he cannot tell if they are tank rounds or mortars. Tracers arcing in multiple directions, some American red, some German green. Impossible. To determine who is firing at what, he makes a command decision. Move the tank forward to the intersection, establish a blocking position, hope to catch German armor in silhouette against fires that are starting to burn throughout the village. The American roadblock on the N15 highway becomes the focal point of desperate resistance. Captain John Miller, commanding a company of infantry reinforced with 2 anti-tank guns, has positioned his force across the main road leading north from Manhay. When the Panthers break through the outer perimeter, Miller's position is all that stands between the German armor and a clear run to the rear areas. His men open fire at point-blank range, 50 to 100 meters, close enough to see the Death's Head insignia on SS uniforms. One of the anti-tank guns, a 57mm towed piece, gets off 3 shots before a Panther's return fire destroys it and kills the crew. The second anti-tank gun crew holds position, firing, reloading, firing again. They score a hit on a Panther's track, immobilizing it, buying precious seconds. Then they too are destroyed by a high-explosive round that detonates their ammunition. Miller's infantry fights with rifles, bazookas, and grenades against armor and SS assault troops. The bazooka teams score kills. The shaped charge warheads can penetrate Panther side armor at close range, but getting that close means exposing yourself to machine gun fire. Private Danny Ochoa charges a Panther with a bazooka, fires from 20 meters, hits the turret side, watches the tank brew up with satisfaction, before an SS soldier shoots him 3 times in the chest. His body falls in the snow and is crushed under the tracks of the next Panther. Sergeant Mike O'Brien throws a white phosphorus grenade into the open hatch of a Panzer IV, burning the crew alive, then dies when another tank's machine gun cuts him in half. These are not clean deaths or glorious sacrifices. They are brutal, terrifying, intimate violence in darkness where men die without seeing who killed them. The roadblock holds for 45 minutes, an eternity in combat time, long enough for other American units to organize some coherent defense. But by 0200 hours, Miller's company is combat ineffective. Of 120 men who started the night, fewer than 30 are still fighting. The rest are dead, wounded, or have simply disappeared into the confusion of night battle. The anti-tank guns are gone. Ammunition is running low. Miller makes the hardest decision a commander faces. He orders withdrawal. Those who can walk help those who cannot. They abandon weapons, abandon positions, abandon their dead because there is no choice. As they fall back toward the village center, Panthers roll past the roadblock and continue north. The road to the Meuse temporarily open. By 0230, the situation at Manhay is catastrophic from the American perspective. German tanks have reached the village square. The 7th Armored Division headquarters evacuates under fire. Staff officers burning documents and loading radios into jeeps while machine gun fire rattles off the stone buildings around them. General Hasbrouck personally supervises the evacuation, his face grim, knowing that the loss of Manhay means the failure of the entire defensive line. Some units are still fighting in isolated pockets throughout the village, but they are cut off from command and control, fighting individual battles without coordination or support. The Germans have achieved their objective: shock, penetration, disruption. The question now is whether the Americans can stop the exploitation phase, or whether the German breakthrough will become a rout. Lieutenant Grimball finds himself in command of a scratch force defending the intersection at the village center. His Sherman and 3 others, supported by perhaps 50 infantry from various units who have coalesced around the tanks. They face at least a dozen German tanks and an unknown number of SS infantry. Grimball knows the mathematics are impossible. His radio picks up fragments of traffic, other American units withdrawing, artillery unable to fire support missions without risking friendly casualties, reinforcements at least 2 hours away. He should withdraw. Every tactical principle says withdraw, preserve your force, establish new defensive line. But if he withdraws now, the Germans have clear road to Liège. Someone has to buy time. He keys the company radio. All tanks, we hold here until ordered otherwise. Make every shot count. The fight for Manhay Village Center continues through the early morning hours of December 25th. It is not a battle in any conventional sense, but a confused melee of small unit actions in darkness. Sherman tanks duel with Panthers at ranges measured in meters. Infantry squads fight room to room through stone houses. German and American soldiers sometimes fire at each other from opposite sides of the same wall, the bullets punching through ancient stone. The church at the village center changes hands 3 times. SS troops capturing it, American infantry recapturing it, SS troops taking it again. The stone walls are pockmarked with bullet strikes. The pews are soaked with blood from wounded men of both sides who took shelter there. By dawn, when the fighting finally separates into clear lines, 127 Americans are dead, missing, or captured. 18 American tanks are destroyed or abandoned. Manhay has fallen to the 2nd SS Panzer Division, but the Americans have bought 12 hours that will prove crucial to the larger battle. The Germans expected to take Manhay in 2 hours and continue north immediately. Instead, they face an exhausted, depleted force that must reorganize before advancing further. That delay, those 12 hours, represent the difference between breakthrough and stalemate. December 25th, 1944, 0400 hours. Captain John Jordan stands on the ridgeline above Grand Manil village, 1 mile north of fallen Manhay, watching American survivors stream past his position in the darkness. They come in ones and twos, sometimes in squad-sized groups, exhausted men who have been fighting and retreating for 6 hours. Jordan commands what remains of the 2nd Battalion, 289th Infantry Regiment, approximately 400 men who were supposed to be resting after weeks of continuous combat. Instead, they are now the last organized American force between the German breakthrough and open country leading to the Meuse River. Jordan has no illusions about what this means. His battalion must hold, or nothing stops the Germans from exploiting their success at Manhay. Grand Manil itself is a small Belgian village, even smaller than Manhay, perhaps 30 stone houses clustered on a slight rise in the terrain. In the rolling landscape of the Ardennes, even 40 meters of elevation matters enormously. Jordan's position on the northern edge of the village ridge gives him clear observation southward toward Manhay. More importantly, it provides fields of fire across 800 meters of open ground that any German advance must cross. This is defensive terrain, not as good as military engineers would choose, but better than the flat ground at Manhay. Jordan spends the hours before dawn positioning his force with the careful attention of a man who knows his decisions will determine who lives and who dies. The forces available to Jordan are a patchwork, the reality of late-war American units scraped together from what is available. His own infantry battalion is at perhaps 60% strength. 4 companies that should total 800 men now field closer to 400. Attached to him are 7 Sherman tanks, all that remains of a company that started the bulge with 17. 3 anti-tank guns, 2 of them the inadequate 37mm door knockers that barely scratch Panther armor, 1 the more effective 57mm piece. Most critically, Jordan has established communication with 3 artillery battalions in the rear, 36 guns total, a concentration of firepower that will prove decisive. He positions the Shermans in hull-down positions on the reverse slope of the ridge, where only their turrets are visible to anyone approaching from the south. The infantry dig in along the crest of the ridge, using the slight elevation and the stone walls of Grand Manil for cover. As dawn breaks on Christmas morning, Jordan sees the Germans coming, a column of at least 20 tanks, Panthers, and Panzer IVs intermixed, advancing up the road from Manhay with the confidence of victors. SS infantry and half-tracks follow the tanks, preparing to dismount and clear Grand Manil the same way they cleared Manhay, with overwhelming force applied ruthlessly. Jordan waits. The German column approaches to 600 meters, 500, 400. He wants them close enough that even his weaker guns can hurt them, close enough that surprise will multiply his limited firepower. At 300 meters, Jordan gives the order, all weapons, fire. The American ambush is devastating. 7 Shermans fire simultaneously at the lead German vehicles, armor-piercing rounds hitting tracks, engine compartments, turret sides at ranges where even the 75mm gun is lethal. The first 3 German tanks in column explode or lurch to a halt, blocking the road for vehicles behind them. Infantry open up with everything they have, machine guns, rifles, bazookas, even hand grenades thrown from the ridge down onto German infantry, dismounting from half-tracks. The artillery observer with Jordan, a young lieutenant named Peters, calls for fire mission. Fire for effect, concentration alpha, expend basic load. 90 seconds later, the first artillery rounds impact, time fused to detonate above ground for maximum fragmentation effect. The German column, caught in the open on a narrow road with disabled vehicles blocking movement, takes massive casualties in the first 5 minutes of engagement. But the SS troops are veterans. They do not panic and they do not break. The tanks that can move reverse back behind the wrecked vehicles in front. Infantry take cover in ditches and return fire. German artillery begins counter-battery fire, trying to suppress the American guns in the rear. A German company deploys off the road, attempting to flank Grand Manil from the east. Jordan shifts one of his infantry companies to meet this threat, thin his line elsewhere, but prevents envelopment. The battle settles into a grinding exchange of fire, neither side able to advance, both sides taking casualties they can ill afford. This is what historians will later call a meeting engagement, where 2 forces collide before either has established clear defensive positions. And victory goes to whoever can mass firepower more effectively and accept casualties longer. Throughout Christmas Day, the Germans assault Grand Manil 7 separate times. Each assault follows a similar pattern, artillery preparation for 10 to 15 minutes, tanks advancing under covering fire, SS infantry following to consolidate any ground gained. Each time, American artillery and the well-positioned Shermans shatter the attack before it can develop momentum. By noon, the slope south of Grand Manille is littered with destroyed vehicles, both German and American. 3 more Shermans are knocked out, reducing Jordan's armor to 4 operational tanks. German losses are higher, at least 9 Panthers and Panzer IVs destroyed, visible from the American positions, with more possibly damaged and withdrawn. The infantry losses are harder to count, but clearly severe on both sides. The critical moment comes at 1400 hours when a German assault penetrates into Grand Manille village itself. A Panther, supported by a platoon of SES's or infantry, breaks through the American line on the eastern flank and gets into the stone houses. For 30 minutes, the outcome hangs in balance. If the Germans can consolidate in the village, they can bring up reinforcements and push the Americans off the ridge. Jordan commits his last reserve, a platoon of infantry and 1 Sherman commanded by Lieutenant Grimball, who has somehow survived Manhay and made it to Grand Manille. Grimball maneuvers his tank through narrow village streets, finds the Panther stationary while its crew confers with infantry, and puts an armor-piercing round through its thinner rear armor at 50 meters. The Panther explodes. Without tank support, the SS infantry fall back, leaving 23 bodies in the village streets. By 1800 hours, as darkness falls on Christmas Day, the battle tapers off. The Germans have suffered their first clear tactical defeat of the Ardennes Offensive. They attempted to exploit their breakthrough at Manhay and were stopped cold by a hastily organized American defense. The cost to Jordan's battalion is severe: 89 men killed, 156 wounded, out of 400 who started the day. He has lost 3 more Shermans, but Grand Manille still holds, and the road to the Meuse is blocked. More importantly, the 12-hour delay at Manhay plus the full-day battle at Grand Manille has bought time for Allied command to react. Reinforcements are moving toward the sector. Artillery is being concentrated. The weather is clearing, which means Allied air power will soon enter the battle. The soldiers in Jordan's battalion do not know they have fought a decisive engagement. They know only that they survived another day, that their positions held, that their friends died defending a village whose name they cannot pronounce. They eat cold rations and try to warm themselves at small fires, knowing the flames make them targets but too cold to care. Some write letters home, though mail service from combat zones is irregular at best. Some simply stare at nothing, the 1,000-yard stare of men who have seen too much combat, who are running on empty, who will keep fighting because that is what soldiers do. Jordan moves among them, offering words of encouragement that sound hollow even to himself. What can you say to men who held against impossible odds? Thank you seems inadequate. Well done seems condescending. So, he says nothing much, just clasps shoulders and makes sure the wounded are evacuated, and the defensive positions are maintained for another night. In the captured German documents recovered after the battle, American intelligence will find that the 2nd SS Panzer Division reported to higher headquarters. Advance halted at Grand Manille due to heavy resistance. Unable to proceed without reinforcements and resupply. Casualties severe. It is a bland military assessment of what was, for the men who fought there, a day of concentrated horror. But that bland assessment matters, strategically. Unable to proceed means the German offensive has culminated, reached the point where offensive power is exhausted. Without reinforcements and resupply means the Germans are running out of everything: fuel, ammunition, replacement soldiers, luck. Casualty severe means they cannot afford many more victories like Manhay if each victory costs this much. The Americans do not know it yet on Christmas night, 1944, but the Battle of the Bulge has reached its high water mark. The German tide will advance a few more kilometers over the next days, will fight a few more desperate battles, but will never again achieve the breakthrough that seemed possible when they took Manhay on Christmas Eve. December 26, 1944. 1100 hours. American forces retake Manhay village after a dawn counterattack supported by overwhelming artillery. The Germans, their offensive power exhausted, withdraw north and east, leaving behind destroyed vehicles, abandoned equipment, and bodies frozen in the snow. Among the American soldiers entering the village is Captain Robert Ellis of the Criminal Investigation Division, sent forward with disturbing orders. Investigate reports of atrocities committed during the German occupation of Manhay. Ellis is a military policeman, a former Detroit detective who joined the Army after Pearl Harbor, expecting to spend the war processing traffic accidents and theft reports. Instead, he finds himself documenting war crimes in a frozen Belgian village where the evidence is written in blood and spent shell casings. The first bodies are found in the church basement. 11 American soldiers, hands bound with wire behind their backs, shot in the head, execution style. Ellis photographs each body, notes the position, documents the method of killing with the clinical detachment required for evidence collection. The soldiers are all from different units, captured during the chaotic night battle on December 24th. Someone, presumably German soldiers, assembled them in this basement, bound them, and methodically executed them. This violates the Geneva Convention's protections for prisoners of war, makes it not combat but murder. Ellis bags the wire used for binding, collects shell casings from the floor, makes notes about powder burns that indicate the victims were shot from less than 1 meter distance. Professional execution, he writes in his report, not battlefield action. Belgian witnesses provide testimony that Ellis finds both credible and horrifying. Marie Bodson, who survived the battle in her cellar, describes seeing SS soldiers on December 25th taking 6 American prisoners from the church to the basement. "We heard shots," she tells Ellis through a translator. "Many shots. Then the Germans came back up alone. They were laughing." Another witness, the farmer Jacques Lemaire, describes seeing SS troops separate American prisoners into groups on Christmas morning, taking some toward the rear, as official pews taking others toward the church. The pattern suggests systematic selection. Those deemed useful for intelligence purposes were preserved, others were eliminated. This is not the heat of battle, not soldiers making life or death decisions in combat confusion. This is calculated killing of helpless men after fighting has stopped. Ellis expands his investigation to include missing Americans. The casualty reports from Manhay list 23 men as missing, not confirmed dead, not confirmed captured, simply gone. In normal combat, missing soldiers often turn up later, having been separated from their units, or they are found among the dead after battlefield confusion clears. But Ellis's investigation suggests a darker explanation for at least some of these missing men. He finds a burned-out barn on the southern edge of Manhay containing 6 bodies so badly burned that identification is impossible. The bodies are in a pile, suggesting they were not killed by the fire, but placed there afterward. Forensic examination, limited though it is in field conditions, indicates the men were dead before burning. Ellis cannot prove these are the missing Americans, cannot prove SS troops killed them, but the circumstantial evidence is damning. The Belgian civilian casualties complicate the investigation further. 8 Belgian civilians died during the German occupation of Manhay, December 25th to 26th. Some clearly died from combat action, caught in crossfire, killed by artillery, or stray bullets. But others died in circumstances that suggest deliberate killing. A 60-year-old man named Georges Petit was found shot in his cellar, his body showing no signs of combat wounds but a single bullet to the head. His wife claims SS soldiers took him away for questioning about American positions, then shot him when he denied knowing anything. 2 teenage boys, brothers, were found dead near the village edge with their hands also bound. The Germans claimed they were saboteurs or resistance fighters. The families insist they were civilians with no resistance connections. The truth, Ellis suspects, is somewhere in between. Young men who perhaps guided American patrols or provided information, killed for collaboration with the enemy. The investigation into war crimes at Manhay will continue for 3 years after the battle, producing a 127-page CID report that documents probable violations of the Geneva Convention, probable war crimes, probable murders of prisoners and civilians. The report identifies the 2nd SS Panzer Division as the responsible unit and notes that this division has a history of similar atrocities, specifically referencing Oradour-sur-Glane and multiple incidents on the Eastern Front. The report recommends prosecution of specific officers and soldiers for war crimes, but the recommendations die in the bureaucratic maze of post-war justice. By 1947, when the case file is finally reviewed, the Cold War has begun and priorities have shifted. German soldiers are no longer enemies, but potential allies against the Soviet Union. The German officers who might be prosecuted are considered too valuable for their military knowledge to waste on war crimes trials for relatively minor incidents. The legal complexities are genuine, not merely excuses. War crimes prosecution requires proof beyond reasonable doubt, requires identifying specific individuals who committed specific acts, requires evidence that would stand up in court. At Manhay, the evidence is fragmentary. Multiple SS units passed through the village during the chaotic hours of December 25th. Companies and platoons were intermixed during the battle. Record-keeping was poor to non-existent. The German unit war diaries, which might identify which specific soldiers were where at what time, were mostly destroyed during the retreat. Witnesses can identify SS insignia, can sometimes identify specific units by divisional markings, but cannot identify individuals. Without identified perpetrators, prosecution is impossible no matter how strong the circumstantial evidence. Sergeant William Morrison, one of the few survivors among the captured Americans at Manhay, provides testimony that Ellis finds particularly valuable and particularly disturbing. Morrison was captured on Christmas Eve during the initial assault, taken with 12 other men to the church basement on Christmas morning. They separated us into groups, Morrison tells Ellis. I don't know why some of us went one way and some went another. Maybe random, maybe they were picking out officers, I don't know. My group, 7 of us, they took us north, eventually to a POW camp. The other group, 11 men, they stayed in the basement. I heard shooting as we were leaving. I don't know for certain what happened, but I can guess. Morrison's testimony establishes that the separation of prisoners was deliberate, systematic, and that at least some SS soldiers knew exactly what was happening to the men left behind. The psychological impact on American soldiers who discover the execution site is significant. These are not professional investigators like Ellis. They are combat infantrymen who signed up to fight soldiers, not to process crime scenes. They see their fellow Americans lying in pools of frozen blood with their hands tied, and rage replaces discipline. Some want immediate retaliation against German prisoners. Officers have to physically restrain men from shooting German Ps captured during the Manhay counterattack. The cycle of atrocity and counter-atrocity that could have followed is prevented only by strict adherence to discipline in the Geneva Convention. American commanders make clear, we do not execute prisoners, we do not murder the helpless, we are not the SS. But the temptation is real, and some soldiers will later admit they shot Germans who tried to surrender in subsequent battles, justifying it by Manhay. The final section of Ellis's report addresses the question that haunts all war crimes investigations. Why? Why execute prisoners when taking them to the rear would be easier? Why kill civilians who pose no threat? The answer, Ellis concludes, lies in the nature of the SS as an organization. The SS was not merely a military unit, but an ideological vanguard, indoctrinated with Nazi racial theories, believing that war was not just about defeating enemies, but about destroying inferiors. The SS training emphasized ruthlessness as a virtue, mercy as weakness. On the Eastern Front, SS units routinely executed prisoners, commissars, Jews, civilians, anyone deemed expendable. The fact that Manhay was in Western Europe fighting against Americans, rather than in Eastern Europe fighting Soviets, made no difference to their operational methods. They fought the way they were trained to fight, with systematic brutality that violated every convention of civilized warfare. The Manhay atrocities are not unique in the Battle of the Bulge. The Malmedy massacre, where SS troops machine-gunned 84 American prisoners on December 17th, is more famous and better documented. But Manhay represents something perhaps more disturbing, not a single dramatic massacre, but systematic elimination of prisoners over 2 days, carefully hidden, denied by perpetrators, nearly successful in escaping justice entirely. If Captain Ellis had not been ordered to investigate, if Belgian witnesses had not come forward, if Sergeant Morrison had not survived to testify, the Manhay killings might have disappeared into the fog of war entirely, listed as missing in action, presumed dead, with no one knowing the truth. This is how war crimes often occur, not as dramatic atrocities that make headlines, but as quiet murders in basements and barns, witnessed only by victims and perpetrators, documented only by chance. December 26, 1944, 0800 hours. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery arrives at the headquarters of the 18th Airborne Corps, his staff car navigating roads clogged with American vehicles moving toward the front. Montgomery, commander of all Allied ground forces north of the German penetration since Eisenhower's controversial decision 6 days ago, has come to personally take charge of the counteroffensive. He steps from his car wearing his trademark beret and casual sweater, a calculated contrast to the formal American uniforms around him. Major General Matthew Ridgway salutes and begins briefing the British Field Marshal on the situation. Montgomery listens, interrupts with sharp questions, and within 30 minutes has made decisions that will change the course of the Battle of the Bulge. The fall of Manhay has shocked Allied High Command into action more effectively than any intelligence report could have. For 10 days, since the German offensive began on December 16th, the Allied response has been reactive and piecemeal. Rush units to plug gaps, establish defensive lines, try to contain the penetration. Now, with German forces having achieved their deepest advance and clearly exhausted their offensive power, Montgomery sees the opportunity to transition from defense to counterattack. The Germans are at the end of their tether, he tells Ridgway. They have advanced too far. Their supply lines are stretched impossible. They have no reserves. Now, we crush them. It is vintage Montgomery. Absolute confidence, clear vision, willingness to stake everything on decisive action. The forces Montgomery can commit to retaking Manhay and destroying the German salient are impressive by any standard. The British 30th Corps, approximately 30,000 men with 200 tanks, begins moving south from positions near Liège. The American 2nd Armored Division, 15,000 men and 190 tanks, has been held in reserve specifically for counterattack and now receives orders to move toward Manhay. The 82nd Airborne Division, already heavily engaged on the northern shoulder of the Bulge, will attack toward Manhay from the east. Combined with the forces already defending Grand Manille, Montgomery is concentrating over 60,000 men and nearly 400 tanks against a German force that has perhaps 15,000 men and fewer than 100 operational tanks remaining. The mathematics of combat power favor the Allies by 4-1, odds that even German tactical skill cannot overcome. But numbers alone do not win battles, coordination does. And coordination is exactly what has been lacking in the American response to the Bulge offensive until now. Montgomery's contribution is not just additional forces, but a unified command structure that can synchronize operations. He establishes clear boundaries between British and American sectors, assigns specific objectives to each division, establishes timetables for coordinated attacks, and most importantly, concentrates artillery and air power to support the ground offensive. By the afternoon of December 26th, the confused tangle of competing authorities that plagued the Manhay defense has been replaced by a clear chain of command and a coherent operational plan. The most significant change is not on the ground, but in the sky. For 10 days, the Battle of the Bulge has been fought under clouds and fog that grounded Allied aircraft and negated the massive advantage in air power that the Allies normally enjoy. Hitler specifically chose December for his offensive, knowing that winter weather would protect his forces from air attack. On December 26th, the weather finally clears. High pressure moves into the Ardennes region, bringing temperatures that drop below -20 Celsius, but also bringing clear skies for the first time since the offensive began. At American and British airfields across Belgium and France, ground crews work through the night, preparing aircraft for maximum effort operations. By dawn on December 26th, the sky over the Ardennes belongs to the Allies. The air campaign begins at first light, with fighter bombers attacking German supply lines. P-47 Thunderbolts from the 9th Air Force, British Typhoons from the 2nd Tactical Air Force, even American P-51 Mustangs diverted from bomber escort duties, all converge on the Ardennes. They hunt for German convoys on the roads, for tank concentrations in the forests, for any target that can slow or stop the German ability to supply and reinforce their advanced positions. The pilots have been frustrated for days, watching the ground battle from bases where they could not participate. Now they throw themselves into combat with an intensity born of pent-up aggression. The first day of clear weather sees over 5,000 Allied sorties, the most concentrated air offensive of the entire campaign in Northwest Europe. On the ground, American soldiers react to Allied air power with a relief that borders on euphoria. For 10 days they have fought without air support, feeling vulnerable and alone. Now, they watch as fighter bombers scream overhead, diving on German positions, rocketing and strafing anything that moves. The psychological effect is as important as the physical damage. Soldiers who were retreating yesterday stand and fight today because they know the tables have turned, know that German armor advancing in daylight will be torn apart by air attack, know that for the first time since the offensive began, the Allies have the initiative. Morale, that intangible factor that determines whether armies fight or collapse, swings dramatically in the American favor. The Germans react to the changed situation with the realism of professionals who know when an offensive has failed. Colonel Hugo Krass, commanding the 2nd SS Panzer Division, receives orders from higher headquarters to hold Manhay and prepare to resume the advance. He looks at those orders and knows they are fantasy. His division has perhaps 6,000 effective combat soldiers remaining out of 15,000 who started the offensive. He has fewer than 40 operational tanks, and those lack fuel for sustained operations. His artillery is down to 20 rounds per gun, strictly rationed because no resupply is reaching the front. Most critically, his men are exhausted, having fought continuously for 11 days with minimal rest, minimal food, and growing certainty that the war is lost. Krass issues orders to prepare defensive positions around Manhay, knowing that defense is all he can realistically attempt. The strategic situation has shifted decisively. The German offensive aimed to reach Antwerp, split the British and American armies, force a negotiated peace. None of these objectives have been achieved or now can be achieved. The deepest German advance reached within 4 miles of the Meuse River at Dinant but never crossed it. The Allied armies are battered but not split. Reinforcements are arriving daily, and the logistics advantage that allows America to replace losses quickly is asserting itself. Hitler, in his headquarters in Germany, refuses to acknowledge reality and orders the offensive to continue. His field commanders know better. Von Rundstedt, the overall commander in the West, has already drafted plans for withdrawal, waiting only for Hitler to face facts and authorize it. At Eisenhower's headquarters, the mood shifts from crisis management to planning exploitation. Intelligence reports confirm what the ground commanders have been saying. The Germans are finished offensively. Now is the time to destroy them. Eisenhower issues a directive that will guide Allied operations for the next month. Our policy must be to destroy enemy forces west of the Rhine. The opportunity now presents itself to inflict a major defeat on the Wehrmacht from which it cannot recover. This means not just retaking lost ground, but encircling and destroying German forces that have advanced too far into Allied territory. Manhay, that small crossroads that seemed so critical when the Germans were advancing, now becomes critical in the opposite direction. It is a choke point through which German forces must retreat, a place where they can be caught and destroyed. Montgomery's counterattack is scheduled to begin on December 27th, giving commanders 1 day to position forces and coordinate the complex ballet of combined arms warfare. Artillery battalions move into firing positions, their guns already registered on target areas from prepared data. Tank companies receive specific objectives and routes of advance. Infantry battalions are assigned to follow tanks and clear villages. Engineer companies prepare bridging equipment to cross streams and rivers swollen by winter snowmelt. Logistics officers organize fuel and ammunition dumps to keep the advance supplied. The scale of preparation required for a major offensive is enormous, involving thousands of individual actions that must be synchronized or the whole operation collapses into chaos. The soldiers who will conduct this offensive are not the same men who fought at Manhay 5 days ago. Many of those men are dead, wounded, or simply too exhausted to continue fighting effectively. The units moving up for the counterattack are relatively fresh, pulled from quiet sectors or held in reserve specifically for this moment. They have been briefed on what happened at Manhay, on the German atrocities, on the desperate fighting that bought time for this counteroffensive to be organized. Some of them are veterans, men who fought across France and know their business. Others are replacements, fresh from training camps in England or even the United States, about to experience combat for the first time. All of them understand that the offensive is changing direction, that the Germans who seemed unstoppable 10 days ago are now vulnerable, that this attack is not just about retaking a village, but about destroying an enemy army. As darkness falls on December 26th, the American positions around Manhay are unrecognizable from the chaotic confusion of Christmas Eve. Clear defensive lines have been established. Artillery is positioned and ready. Tanks are fueled and armed. Infantry is dug in and supplied. Command posts have reliable communications with higher headquarters and with subordinate units. The fog of war has lifted, replaced by the clear visibility that comes when one side has overwhelming superiority and knows it. Tomorrow the counterattack begins, and the Germans who took Manhay in a night of terror will learn what it means to face Allied combined arms warfare with clear weather and unlimited firepower. The Battle of Manhay is not over, but its outcome is no longer in doubt. The question now is not whether the Allies will retake the village, but how many Germans will escape the trap that is closing around them. December 27, 1944, 1400 hours. The American counterattack toward Manhay begins not with infantry assault or tank charge, but with artillery, a concentration of firepower that transforms tactical doctrine into physical reality. 15 battalions of American artillery, 180 guns ranging from 75mm pack howitzers to 155mm long toms, fire simultaneously in a choreographed sequence called time on target. The technique requires precise calculation. Guns at different distances fire at different times so that all shells arrive on target simultaneously, denying the enemy any warning between first impact and full barrage. At Manhay, 180 shells detonate within a 10-second window, turning the German defensive positions into an inferno of high explosive and steel fragments. Lieutenant Colonel Hugh O'Farrell, commanding a tank battalion of the 2nd Armored Division, watches the artillery preparation from his position 3 kilometers south of Manhay. Through binoculars, he sees the village disappear under smoke and explosions, sees entire buildings collapse, sees secondary explosions as German ammunition stocks detonate. This is the American way of war in late 1944. Apply overwhelming firepower to suppress defenders, then advance under continuing artillery support, using material superiority to minimize casualties. O'Farrell has fought this way from Normandy to the German border, and he knows it works against even elite troops like the SS. The question is never whether the artillery will break the defense, but how quickly his tanks can exploit before the Germans recover. The artillery barrage continues for 20 minutes, an eternity for anyone under the shells. German soldiers in Manhay crouch in cellars and foxholes, enduring concussion that ruptures eardrums and collapses lungs, enduring fragments that penetrate any cover less substantial than stone or earth. Communications are cut as telephone wires are severed and radio antennas are destroyed. Observation posts are obliterated. Tank crews button up inside their vehicles, unable to see, unable to communicate, able only to wait for the barrage to lift and hope their tank is still operational. This is not the terror of combat, where you can fight back and feel some agency. This is the terror of helplessness, of being unable to do anything but endure and pray that the next shell does not land directly on your position. When the artillery lifts at 1420 hours, O'Farrell's battalion advances immediately. 40 Sherman tanks move forward in companies, each company following a different route, presenting the Germans with multiple threats they cannot concentrate against. Behind the tanks, infantry and half-tracks follow at a distance calculated to exploit breakthroughs without getting caught in tank versus tank duels. This is combined arms warfare, as the Americans have perfected it through 2 years of combat. Tanks provide shock and firepower, infantry clear resistance that tanks cannot handle, artillery supports both by shifting fire to any strong point that develops. The doctrine works because American industry can provide unlimited tanks, unlimited artillery ammunition, unlimited fuel, unlimited replacement soldiers. The Germans can trade kill ratios in their favor, but still lose the attrition battle. The first German resistance develops at the southern edge of Manhay, where SS infantry have established positions in stone houses that survived the artillery barrage. A Panther tank, hidden in a barn, knocks out the lead American Sherman with a flank shot at 400 meters. O'Farrell's battalion responds with practiced efficiency. 3 Shermans maneuver to get side shots on the Panther, while infantry dismounts and assaults the houses with flamethrowers and demolition charges. The Panther is destroyed within 5 minutes. The German infantry positions are overrun within 10 minutes. This small action illustrates the fundamental problem facing the Germans. They can still win individual tactical engagements, but they cannot win enough of them fast enough to stop an enemy with 4 times their numbers and unlimited ammunition. By 1500 hours, American forces have penetrated into Manhay village proper. The street fighting is brutal and intimate, conducted at ranges measured in meters rather than hundreds of meters. Sherman tanks blast holes in stone walls for infantry to assault through. Bazookas teams hunt German tanks from second-floor windows. Machine gunners duel across cobblestone streets. The Americans have the advantage of firepower and numbers, but the Germans have the advantage of defending, knowing every cellar and alley, having prepared positions. Each house must be cleared, each position reduced by force. The advance slows to a crawl measured in buildings per hour rather than kilometers per hour. The critical breakthrough comes at 1600 hours, when American forces reach the central crossroads, the same intersection where American defenders fell on Christmas Eve. A fierce battle develops for control of the church and the stone buildings around the square. 3 Shermans are knocked out by a well-positioned Panther firing from a hidden position. American infantry assault the church under covering fire, clear it room by room, discover German wounded in the basement who are too injured to fight or flee. The Americans provide medical care to these wounded enemies, a stark contrast to the atrocities committed by the SS 3 days earlier. This is not mercy, but discipline, adherence to the Geneva Convention, even when the enemy has violated it, proof that civilization can coexist with combat. By 1700 hours, organized German resistance in Manhay collapses. SS troops begin withdrawing to the north and east, abandoning positions they cannot hold, trying to establish new defensive lines before the American advance overruns them completely. Colonel Cross, the 2nd SS Panzer Division commander, orders a fighting retreat, use rear guards to slow the Americans, save the bulk of the force, accept the loss of Manhay as inevitable. But executing a fighting retreat while under continuous artillery fire and air attack is nearly impossible. Rear guards are cut off and destroyed. Units lose communication and retreat independently. What begins as an organized withdrawal threatens to become a rout. The most devastating losses come not from ground combat, but from air attack. As German forces withdraw north from Manhay, they become visible on roads cleared of snow by their own traffic. American fighter bombers, orbiting overhead in shifts to maintain continuous coverage, dive on these columns with rockets and bombs. P-47 Thunderbolts, each carrying 10 5-inch high-velocity rockets and 8 50-caliber machine guns with 2,500 rounds, make repeated strafing runs along the withdrawal routes. The effect is catastrophic. Trucks explode, half-tracks burn, tanks are abandoned when their crews are killed or wounded. Soldiers who survive the air attack scatter into the forest, abandoning vehicles and heavy weapons, concerned only with survival. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, which took Manhay with 15,000 men and 60 tanks, withdraws with fewer than 6,000 men and 20 operational tanks. The rest are dead, wounded, captured, or scattered. By 1800 hours, American forces have completely retaken Manhay. An American flag is raised at the Crossroads, the same intersection that changed hands twice in 4 days, a symbolic gesture that matters more for morale than for tactical significance. The soldiers who fought to retake the village are exhausted but triumphant. They have avenged the Christmas Eve defeat, have proven that the Germans can be beaten, have demonstrated that Allied firepower and coordination can overcome even elite SS troops. Lieutenant Colonel O'Farrell walks through the captured village, noting the destruction. Hardly a building intact, the church roof collapsed, streets cratered by shells, the smell of death everywhere. This is victory in modern warfare, not glorious but brutal, not celebrated but grimly acknowledged as necessary. The cost of the counterattack is significant but manageable by American standards. 89 men killed, 267 wounded, 13 tanks destroyed. These numbers would be catastrophic for the Germans, who cannot replace such losses. For the Americans, they represent a successful operation at acceptable cost. Replacement soldiers are already moving forward to fill out depleted units. Replacement tanks are being brought up from depot. The casualties will be mourned individually, but do not significantly degrade combat effectiveness at the organizational level. This is the fundamental asymmetry of the Battle of the Bulge. Germany is fighting with its last reserves, while America is fighting with a tiny fraction of its available strength. The German prisoners taken at Manhay, over 400 of them, are the highest single-day POW haul of the entire Ardennes Offensive. Among them are veterans who fought at Stalingrad, at Kursk, in Normandy, men who have seen the Wehrmacht at its peak and now witness its decline. American intelligence officers interrogate these prisoners, seeking information about German capabilities, morale, supply status. What they learn confirms what the battle itself demonstrates. Germany is finished. The prisoners speak openly about fuel shortages, ammunition rationing, lack of air cover, declining morale. They do not express confidence in victory, do not claim that secret weapons or miraculous relief is coming. They simply express exhaustion and relief that for them, the war is over. As darkness falls on December 27th, the Battle of Manhay is effectively concluded. Fighting will continue for several more days as the Germans establish new defensive lines and the Americans consolidate their gains. But the critical action, the change in momentum, has occurred. The Germans who seemed unstoppable on Christmas Eve are now in full retreat. The Americans who seemed on the verge of disaster have turned defense into counteroffensive. Manhay, a village that most soldiers had never heard of before December, has become a symbol of the larger battle. Initial German success followed by American resilience, material superiority overcoming tactical surprise, the moment when Hitler's last gamble failed, and the road to final Allied victory became clear. December 28, 1944, 0900 hours. Captain James Kenny straps himself into the cockpit of his P-47 Thunderbolt at an airfield near Liège, Belgium. The pre-flight checklist is routine after 18 months of combat flying, but Kenny approaches it with the same methodical care he used on his first mission. Check magnetos, check oil pressure, check fuel, check gun charging handles, check rocket pylons. The Thunderbolt is a massive aircraft by fighter standards, weighing 7 tons empty and carrying an armament that could sink a destroyer, 8 50 caliber machine guns with 2,500 rounds total, and today, 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets under the wings. This particular mission is what fighter pilots call a rhubarb, free-ranging attack on targets of opportunity. The briefing was simple. Proceed to Manhay sector, find German vehicles withdrawing north, destroy everything that moves. The weather is perfect for ground attack, a pilot's dream and a soldier's nightmare. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, light winds. The cold front that brought snow and fog for 2 weeks has passed, replaced by high pressure and temperatures that drop below -20 Celsius but allow aircraft to operate without restriction. Kenny's squadron, the 365th Fighter Group, is one of 48 Thunderbolt squadrons assigned to support the ground offensive today. Combined with British Typhoons, American P-51 Mustangs, and even some heavy bombers diverted to tactical support, the Allies will fly over 5,000 sorties on December 28th, the single highest daily total of the war in Europe. For the Germans withdrawing from Manhay, this means the sky is full of enemies and there is nowhere to hide. Kenny's flight takes off at 0915, 4 aircraft in tight formation. They climb to 3,000 meters, enough altitude to spot targets, but low enough for accurate attack. The flight toward Manhay takes 20 minutes, during which Kenny observes the landscape below. Snow-covered forests, winding roads, small villages that look peaceful from altitude, but he knows are devastated by fighting. He sees American columns moving north, trucks and tanks in organized formations advancing toward the front. Then he sees the German columns, and the difference is stark. The American vehicles move openly, confidently, knowing they own the sky. The German vehicles hide under trees, move in short rushes between cover, show all the signs of an army that fears air attack above everything else. The first target Kenny spots is a column of perhaps 20 vehicles, trucks and half-tracks mixed together, stopped on a road 3 kilometers north of Manhay. From 3,000 meters they look like toys, but Kenny knows each vehicle carries soldiers, ammunition, supplies that the Germans desperately need. He radios his flight. Target below, line astern, we're going in. The Thunderbolt's dive is controlled violence, the heavy aircraft accelerating to over 600 kilometers per hour, the wings shaking from aerodynamic stress, the engine roar drowning out all other sound. At 1,000 meters, Kenny selects rockets, aims by putting the target at a specific point on his windscreen, and fires 2 rockets. They leap from under the wings trailing white smoke, accelerate to supersonic speed, and strike the lead vehicle in a double explosion that flips the truck onto its side. The remaining aircraft in Kenny's flight follow him down, each pilot selecting targets, each rocket finding vehicles that explode or burn. Then comes the strafing run, pulling out of the dive at 300 meters altitude, aligning the nose with the road, pressing the gun button. 850 caliber machine guns fire simultaneously, each gun's cyclic rate 800 rounds per minute, combined rate over 6,000 rounds per minute. The effect on ground targets is devastating. 50 caliber bullets, each weighing 43 grams and traveling at 800 meters per second, penetrate truck engines, puncture fuel tanks, kill exposed soldiers. Kenny's 2-second burst fires 200 rounds, any one of which could destroy a vehicle or kill a man. The German column, caught in the open, is annihilated in under 90 seconds. The Germans are not entirely helpless. Some units have 37mm flak guns that fire back at attacking aircraft. The flak bursts, small black puffs in the sky, are more intimidating than effective, but they force pilots to vary altitude and approach angles, reducing accuracy. Kenny's Thunderbolt takes 2 hits from flak fragments, small holes in the wings that do no structural damage, but remind him that flying ground attack missions is more dangerous than air-to-air combat. Fighter pilots face other fighters who have similar capabilities and limitations. Ground attack pilots face massed automatic weapons fire, every soldier with a rifle shooting at them, a volume of fire that eventually claims aircraft, no matter how armored or maneuverable. Throughout December 28th, wave after wave of Allied aircraft attacked German forces withdrawing from the Manhay sector. The attacks are not random, but coordinated, with forward air controllers on the ground, directing strikes to specific targets identified by advancing American forces. German convoys that try to move during daylight are destroyed within minutes of being spotted. German units that hide in forests are attacked with napalm, a new weapon that burns through trees and spreads terror beyond its physical effect. German forces attempting to establish defensive positions are hit with fragmentation bombs before they can dig in. The cumulative effect is to make German movement impossible during daylight, forcing them to withdraw only at night, which slows the retreat and allows American ground forces to catch and encircle isolated units. The psychological impact of air attack on German soldiers is as destructive as the physical casualties. Veterans of the Eastern Front are accustomed to Soviet air attack, but Soviet aircraft in 1944 are not as numerous, not as well coordinated, not as lethal as Allied aircraft in the West. The Germans at Manhay experience something different. The certainty that if they are seen from the air, they will be attacked, and if they are attacked, they will likely die. This certainty erodes cohesion and discipline. Soldiers abandon vehicles at the first sound of aircraft engines, scatter into forests, sometimes simply surrender to the nearest Americans because being a prisoner seems safer than facing air attack. Officers lose control of their units as men prioritize survival over following orders. The Luftwaffe's absence makes the Allied air dominance even more psychologically damaging. German soldiers look to the sky and see only enemy aircraft, never their own. The Luftwaffe does attempt to contest Allied air supremacy on December 28th, flying approximately 300 sorties, the most since the offensive began. But 300 German sorties against 5,000 Allied sorties is a ratio of 1 to 17. And the German pilots are mostly inexperienced replacements flying against Allied veterans. The air battles are one-sided massacres. By day's end, the Luftwaffe has lost over 40 aircraft for fewer than 10 Allied losses. The Luftwaffe will not seriously contest Allied air power again during the Battle of the Bulge. Captain Kenny flies 3 missions on December 28th, each one targeting German forces in the Manhay sector. By the end of the day, his squadron is credited with destroying 89 vehicles, a figure that is probably exaggerated by the fog of war, and multiple pilots claiming the same kills, but which reflects real and significant destruction. Kenny himself claims 5 vehicles destroyed, 2 probable, and damage to numerous others. The missions cost his squadron 1 aircraft, shot down by flak with the pilot killed. This 1-to-5 casualty ratio, 1 Allied aircraft lost for 5 German vehicles destroyed, is sustainable for the Allies and catastrophic for the Germans. The mathematics of attrition have shifted decisively. The German losses from air attack during the Manhay withdrawal are difficult to calculate precisely, but are certainly severe. Post-battle analysis estimates that the 2nd SS Panzer Division lost 89 tanks destroyed or abandoned, 500 other vehicles, and approximately 2,000 casualties directly from air attack during the week of December 26 to January 1st. These losses are in addition to casualties from ground combat and represent the decisive factor in preventing the Germans from conducting an organized withdrawal. Without air attack, the Germans might have retreated in good order, saved most of their equipment, established new defensive lines. With continuous air attack, they lose cohesion, abandon equipment, arrive at new positions as a defeated and demoralized force. The Allied air offensive does not just affect the Manhay sector, but degrades German operations across the entire Bulge. Fuel trucks are destroyed before they can reach the front. Ammunition convoys are scattered, headquarters are bombed, forcing command posts to move repeatedly. The cumulative effect is to accelerate the collapse of the German offensive from all causes. Ground combat damages German units, but air power prevents them from recovering. The combination of ground and air warfare, the integration of tactical air support with armored advance, represents a maturity in Allied combined arms doctrine that the Germans cannot match. The Luftwaffe proved in 1939 and 1940 that coordinated air-ground warfare could achieve stunning victories. Now, in 1944, the Allies have perfected the technique and are applying it against its originators. As darkness falls on December 28th, ending flying operations for the day, the pilots return to base and debrief their missions. The intelligence officers compile claims, cross-reference with photo reconnaissance, estimate actual damage inflicted. The numbers are impressive. Over 800 German vehicles destroyed or damaged today, hundreds of casualties inflicted, German withdrawal disrupted across the entire northern shoulder of the Bulge. But the numbers do not capture the human experience. German soldiers huddling in frozen forests listening to aircraft engines overhead, knowing that movement means death. American pilots returning from missions having killed men they never saw up close, whose faces they will never know, whose deaths are statistics in official reports. This is industrial warfare at its most impersonal and most lethal, where technology multiplies killing power beyond anything imaginable in earlier wars, where the margin between victory and defeat is measured not in courage or skill, but in tons of ordnance delivered and targets destroyed. December 29th, 1944, 0300 hours. SS Hauptsturmführer Werner Wolf receives the withdrawal order by field telephone in a snow-filled foxhole north of Manhay. The order is terse, military language stripped to essentials. All units withdraw to line Alpha 7 by 0600 hours. Maintain contact with enemy to prevent pursuit. Destroy all equipment that cannot be moved. Wolf reads the order twice, not because he does not understand it, but because he cannot quite believe it. The 2nd SS Panzer Division is withdrawing, abandoning the ground purchased with thousands of casualties, retreating toward the German border with the Americans pressing close behind. The offensive is over. Germany has lost. The mechanics of withdrawal are complex and dangerous, requiring discipline and coordination at exactly the moment when both are hardest to maintain. Wolf commands what remains of a company that started the offensive with 120 men. He has 43 left, the rest killed, wounded, or missing. His orders are to act as rear guard, to hold his position until 0530, to allow other units to disengage, then to withdraw himself and destroy anything useful that cannot be carried. This means blowing up disabled tanks, burning supply dumps, demolishing bridges. It means accepting that men will die covering a retreat, sacrificed to buy minutes for others to escape. Wolf has done this before, on the Eastern Front, where the Wehrmacht learned the bitter craft of fighting withdrawal from the Soviet offensives of 1943 and 44. But knowing what to do does not make it easier. The withdrawal begins in darkness, a calculated choice because darkness provides some protection from American air attack, but makes coordination nearly impossible. Units move by compass and memory, following forest trails and back roads, trying to avoid the main highways where American armored columns are advancing. Traffic jams develop at bridges and defiles, where everyone must funnel through the same narrow passage. Officers try to maintain march discipline, but exhaustion and fear erode compliance. Vehicles that break down are pushed to the side of the road and abandoned, sometimes after removing key components to deny them to the enemy. sometimes simply left intact because there is no time. Soldiers who cannot keep up, the wounded and the sick, and the simply too tired, are left behind with the vague promise that someone will come back for them. Few believe this promise, and most are right not to. The scenes of withdrawal are chaotic and desperate. A Panther tank, out of fuel, is prepared for demolition by its crew. They remove the machine guns and optical sights, take personal equipment, place demolition charges in the engine compartment, and ammunition storage. The resulting explosion destroys the tank utterly, ensures it cannot be used or studied by the enemy. But that tank represented millions of Reichsmarks of investment, months of production labor, a weapon that Germany can no longer afford to lose. Across the withdrawal route, similar scenes repeat. Half-track, abandoned with transmission failure, artillery piece spiked because the prime mover broke down, mortars thrown into streams because carrying them is impossible. The Germans are not just retreating, they are disintegrating. American forces pursue aggressively but cautiously, knowing that a retreating enemy can still be dangerous. The 2nd Armored Division advances north from Manhay, probing German positions, engaging rear guards, trying to determine where organized resistance ends and rout begins. American tanks do not charge blindly forward. Memories of Manhay's Christmas Eve disaster are too fresh. Instead, they advance by bounds. One platoon moves, while another provides overwatch. Infantry scouts ahead of the armor to detect ambushes. Artillery stands ready to suppress any resistance. This methodical advance is slower than an all-out pursuit, but reduces casualties and maintains unit cohesion. The Americans are winning, they know it, and they will not throw away victory through recklessness. The weather, which had been the Germans' ally during their advance, now becomes their enemy during retreat. The clear skies that American pilots praise mean that any German movement during daylight is visible from the air. On December 29th, Allied aircraft fly another 4,000 sorties, hunting German columns on every road leading east from Manhay. The attacks are relentless. A German battalion withdrawing through open country B is caught by fighter bombers and loses half its vehicles in 15 minutes. A supply column is napalmed, the burning fuel spreading through trees and immolating soldiers who cannot escape. A regiment attempting to cross a bridge is caught mid-crossing, the bridge destroyed by bombs, vehicles tumbling into the icy river below. By the end of December 29th, the 2nd SS Panzer Division has effectively ceased to exist as a combat-effective formation. The human cost of withdrawal is measured not just in deaths, but in suffering. German soldiers march through sub-zero temperatures without adequate cold-weather gear, having lost or abandoned most of their equipment. Frostbite casualties exceed combat wounds in many units. Men lose fingers and toes to cold. Sometimes entire hands and feet must be amputated in field hospitals. Others simply lie down in the snow to rest and never wake up, claimed by hypothermia. The medical system, already overwhelmed, collapses under the load. Field hospitals are overrun by the advancing Americans before wounded can be evacuated, leading to thousands of German soldiers becoming prisoners while lying on operating tables or recovery cots. Morale collapses along with physical cohesion. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, an elite formation that began the offensive with high morale and confidence in victory, ends it as a shattered wreck where desertion is common and officers struggle to maintain any authority. Desertion, rare in German units earlier in the war, becomes epidemic in the Bulge's final days. Soldiers slip away from their units during night marches, hide in Belgian barns and cellars, wait for Americans to find them so they can surrender. Some desert not to surrender, but simply to survive, heading east toward Germany and home with no intention of reporting to any military authority. The SS had been theoretically immune to desertion, ideological indoctrination, and harsh discipline, maintaining cohesion even in defeat. But even ideological warriors break when defeat is absolute, and continued fighting is obviously suicidal. The German withdrawal from Manhay and the larger Bulge offensive takes 6 days, from December 29 to January 3rd. By January 4th, 1945, the last German forces have withdrawn across the original start lines from December 16th. The Bulge itself, the salient driven into Allied lines that at its deepest reached almost 60 kilometers, has been eliminated. The front line is essentially where it was before the offensive began, with one critical difference. The Germans who started the offensive are mostly dead, wounded, captured, or too broken to fight effectively. The Wehrmacht has suffered approximately 100,000 casualties in the Bulge, including 29,000 killed. Material losses include 800 tanks, 1,000 aircraft, and uncounted vehicles and artillery pieces. These losses are irreplaceable. Germany has no strategic reserve remaining, no capacity to mount another major offensive. The war will continue for 4 more months, but Germany's ability to shape its outcome has been destroyed in the forests of the Ardennes. Among the German prisoners taken during the withdrawal are men willing to speak frankly to interrogators about what they experienced. One SS sergeant, captured on December 30th, tells an American intelligence officer, "We knew on Christmas Day that we had lost. We could see your aircraft overhead. We could hear your artillery that never stopped. We knew you had more men, more tanks, more everything. But we had orders to continue, so we continued until there was nothing left to continue with." Another prisoner, an 18-year-old conscript in his first battle, says simply, "I am glad the war is over for me. I do not care that Germany is losing. I am alive, and that is enough." These testimonies reveal the psychological shift that has occurred, from confidence in victory to acceptance of defeat, from willingness to die for the cause to determination simply to survive. Colonel Hugo Cross, who commanded the 2nd SS Panzer Division through the Manhay battle and the subsequent withdrawal, is among the last to cross back into German lines on January 3rd. He has approximately 3,000 men remaining from the 15,000 who started the offensive. Most have no heavy weapons, no vehicles, barely any personal equipment. Cross will submit a report to higher headquarters detailing the division's actions, losses, and current status. That report will never reach Hitler, who has moved on to planning other operations with forces that do not exist. Cross himself will be killed in March 1945 during the final defense of Germany, dying not in some dramatic last stand, but in an Allied air raid on a supply depot. His division, rebuilt multiple times from the wreckage of successive defeats, will surrender in May with fewer than 1,000 men remaining, a unit that once numbered 20,000 reduced to a battalion-sized remnant. The withdrawal from Manhay was not just a military retreat, but a symbolic moment. The point where Germany's last offensive capability dies, where the Wehrmacht transitions from an army that can sometimes win battles to an army that can only delay inevitable defeat. The soldiers marching east through the snow in early January 1945 know this, even if they do not speak it aloud. They look at the destroyed vehicles lining the roads, at the frozen bodies of comrades left unburied, at the American tanks, following behind always just out of rifle range, and they understand that Germany has lost the war. Some will continue fighting out of discipline, some from fear of what will happen if Germany loses, some simply because they do not know what else to do. But the belief in victory, the conviction that sacrifice serves a cause that will triumph, has died in the frozen forests of Belgium. Manhay, that small village that briefly bore a German garrison, becomes a tombstone not just for the men who died there, but for the German army's ability to wage offensive warfare. The Battle of the Bulge continues for several more weeks, but its outcome was decided when the Americans retook a crossroads that most people still cannot find on a map. January 5th, 1945, morning. Adolf Hitler sits in his underground bunker complex at the Adlerhorst near Bad Nauheim, Germany, staring at maps that show a truth he refuses to acknowledge. The Ardennes Offensive, his personal strategic vision, has failed completely. The red lines marking German advances have been replaced with blue lines showing Allied counterattacks. The salient that reached within 4 miles of the Meuse River has been compressed back to nothing. His generals stand silently, waiting for the explosion of rage that usually follows bad news. Instead, Hitler speaks quietly, almost conversationally. The offensive achieved its purpose. We have delayed the Allied advance by 6 weeks. We have inflicted severe casualties. The Americans now know the Wehrmacht can still fight. His generals exchange glances but say nothing. They know the truth. Germany has spent its last reserves achieving nothing but its own destruction. The arithmetic of the Battle of the Bulge tells a story of strategic catastrophe disguised as tactical success. Germany committed 200,000 men, 1,000 tanks, and 2,000 artillery pieces to the offensive. German casualties total approximately 100,000 men, 29,000 killed, 40,000 wounded, 23,000 captured or missing. Tank losses exceed 800, roughly 80% of the armor committed. Aircraft losses approach 1,000, including many of the Luftwaffe's remaining experienced pilots. These losses come from a military that has no capacity to replace them. The German army in January 1945 has no strategic reserve, no pool of trained replacements, no production capacity adequate to rebuild shattered divisions. Every tank lost is gone forever. Every trained soldier killed represents capability that cannot be regenerated. Allied losses, while significant, are sustainable and replaceable. American casualties in the Bulge total 81,000, 19,000 killed, 47,000 wounded, 15,000 captured or missing. British casualties add another 1,500. Tank losses total 733, about 10% of Allied armor in theater. Aircraft losses total 400, less than 1 day's production from American factories. But here is the critical difference. By late January, most American units are back to full strength, with replacement soldiers and equipment flowing from depots. The divisions that fought at Manhay receive new tanks, new men, new supplies. Within weeks, they will be combat effective again, ready to resume the offensive into Germany. The German divisions that fought at Manhay will never recover combat effectiveness. They are finished as meaningful military formations. The strategic impact of Manhay specifically, separate from the larger Bulge offensive, reveals itself in how the battle influenced the campaign's timeline and outcome. When the 2nd SS Panzer Division took Manhay on Christmas Eve, they stood poised to exploit toward the Meuse River crossings at Huy and Ardennes. Success there would have severed the supply lines for multiple Allied divisions, created genuine crisis in the Allied rear, possibly achieved the breakthrough Hitler envisioned. But the 12-hour delay at Manhay, caused by unexpectedly strong American resistance, followed by the full-day battle at Grand Mesnil, bought time for Allied command to organize coherent response. By the time German forces finally consolidated at Manhay, the window for exploitation had closed. Reinforcements were arriving, artillery was concentrating, the weather was clearing. Manhay became not a springboard for breakthrough, but a dead end where the German offensive culminated and died. Allied intelligence officers, analyzing the offensive after its conclusion, identify Manhay as one of 3 critical points where German failure became inevitable. The other 2 are Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne Division held a vital crossroads, and the northern shoulder near Elsenborn Ridge, where American infantry stopped the 6th SS Panzer Army's advance cold. But Manhay receives less attention in historical analysis because it fell temporarily to the Germans, creating the impression of German success. In reality, the Christmas Eve capture of Manhay represents tactical victory but operational failure. The Germans took the village but too slowly, lost too many casualties in doing so, and arrived too exhausted to exploit. The American defeat on Christmas Eve set conditions for the decisive American victory on December 27th. The German failure at Manhay and in the larger Bulge offensive accelerates the end of the war by removing Germany's capacity to delay Allied advances into the Reich itself. In mid-December 1944, before the offensive, the Western Allies were preparing to cross the Rhine River and advance into Germany's industrial heartland. The Bulge offensive delayed this by approximately 6 weeks, which sounds significant until you examine what Germany purchased with that delay. The lost tanks, artillery, and trained soldiers were Germany's last operational reserve. Without them, Germany cannot defend the Rhine. Without them, Germany cannot slow the Soviet advance from the east. The 6-week delay cost Germany the forces that might have prolonged the war by months. Hitler's offensive achieves the opposite of its intent. Rather than forcing a negotiated peace, it ensures Germany's rapid and total defeat. The Soviet Union, watching the Bulge offensive from the Eastern Front, draws its own strategic conclusions. Stalin and his generals recognize that Germany's commitment of forces to the West means weakness in the East. On January 12, 1945, just 9 days after the last German forces withdraw from the Bulge, the Soviet Army launches the Vistula-Oder offensive with 2.2 million soldiers, 6,000 tanks, and 46,000 artillery pieces. This massive offensive, the largest single operation of World War II, advances 300 miles in 3 weeks, from the Vistula River in Poland to the Oder River just 50 kilometers from Berlin. The Germans cannot stop or significantly slow this advance because the reserves that might have defended Poland died in Belgium. The strategic link is direct. Manhay and the Bulge Offensive so weakened Germany's overall military capacity that the Soviets achieved in 3 weeks what might have taken months if German forces had remained intact. The impact on German morale and national will is as significant as the material losses. The Bulge Offensive was sold to German soldiers and civilians as proof that the Wehrmacht could still win victories, that secret weapons and superior will could overcome material disadvantage. When the offensive failed so catastrophically, when the vaunted panzer divisions were destroyed achieving nothing, a psychological threshold was crossed. Soldiers who had fought on through years of retreat finally began to accept that defeat was inevitable. Civilians who had endured years of Allied bombing while believing in eventual victory began to question Nazi propaganda. Desertion rates in Wehrmacht units increased 300% in January and February 1945. Civilian compliance with wartime regulations decreases as people begin preparing for defeat rather than supporting continued resistance. The collapse of belief in victory is as strategically significant as the collapse of military capability. Among Allied strategic planners, the Bulge Offensive generates debate about how to exploit German weakness. Some, particularly British Field Marshal Montgomery, argue for a concentrated northern thrust. Mass all Allied forces for a single powerful drive across the Rhine toward Berlin, ending the war quickly by capturing the German capital. Others, particularly American General Omar Bradley, argue for broad front advance, multiple thrusts across the Rhine at different points, forcing Germany to defend everywhere, grinding down remaining German forces through attrition. Eisenhower, as supreme commander, ultimately chooses the broad front strategy, partly for military reasons and partly for political ones. A single northern thrust under Montgomery would give Britain disproportionate credit for victory, which American political leadership finds unacceptable. The strategic debates obscure a fundamental reality. By January 1945, the Allies have won the war in Europe regardless of which strategy they pursue. Germany cannot stop multiple Allied advances because it lacks forces to defend everywhere. Germany cannot trade space for time because it has almost no space left to trade. Germany cannot hope for miracle weapons to change the war's course because even if such weapons existed, there is no time to produce them in meaningful quantities. The only question remaining is how long Germany will continue fighting and how many additional casualties will be suffered on all sides before Hitler accepts defeat or is removed from power. Manhay and the larger Bulge Offensive answer this question. Germany will fight to absolute exhaustion, will squander its last resources in futile offensives, will continue until literally nothing remains. The Battle of Manhay, examined through the lens of strategic outcome rather than tactical details, demonstrates the fundamental reality of modern industrial warfare. Battles are won by logistics, production capacity, and ability to replace losses, not by courage, tactical skill, or superior equipment in isolation. The Germans at Manhay fought with skill and determination, using superior tanks and veteran soldiers. They won the initial battle on Christmas Eve, but they lost the campaign because winning that battle cost resources they could not replace, delayed their advance beyond the window of opportunity, and bought time for enemies with unlimited resources to concentrate overwhelming force. This is why Manhay matters strategically, not because it was a dramatic victory or defeat, but because it exemplifies how material superiority defeats tactical excellence over time. As winter turns towards spring in 1945, the Western Allies cross the Rhine in multiple places, advance into Germany against collapsing resistance, link up with Soviet forces driving from the east. The war in Europe ends on May 8, 1945, with Germany's unconditional surrender. Among the factors that made this possible, historians will list Allied air superiority, Soviet numerical superiority, American industrial production, British intelligence superiority, and the cumulative effect of years of attrition. But the immediate cause, the specific event that destroyed Germany's last capacity for strategic action, was the Ardennes Offensive and battles like Manhay. Hitler gambled everything on one last throw of the dice. He lost. And in losing, he ensured that the war he started in 1939 would end in 1945, with Germany occupied, divided, and destroyed as a military power. Manhay, that forgotten crossroads in Belgium, was where the mathematics of strategic failure became undeniable even to true believers. January 4th, 1945, morning. American medics move across the battlefield at Manhay searching for wounded who might still be alive after days in the snow. The search is methodical and grim. Check every body, look for signs of life, provide morphine if possible, mark locations for graves registration. Private Daniel Kowalski, a medic with the 7th Armored Division, finds a German soldier in a foxhole, still breathing after 8 days without food or water. The German has severe frostbite on both feet and cannot stand. Kowalski calls for a stretcher, administers plasma, speaks soothing words the German cannot understand. The German soldier will survive, will lose both legs to amputation, will spend the rest of his life trying to explain to grandchildren what happened in a Belgian village whose name he can barely pronounce. The casualty count from the Battle of Manhay, compiled over weeks as bodies are recovered and missing soldiers are accounted for, tells the story in numbers that cannot capture the human reality. American losses: 467 killed in action, 23 missing and never recovered, 891 wounded. German losses: 598 killed, 278 missing, 1,450 captured. Belgian civilian losses: 23 killed, 11 missing, and never recovered. These numbers are precise but incomplete. They count bodies but not trauma, record deaths but not destroyed lives, quantify casualties but not the decades of nightmares that follow. The village of Manhay itself is devastated beyond immediate recognition. Of the approximately 50 stone houses that made up the village before the battle, 14 are completely destroyed, reduced to rubble by artillery and tank fire. Another 32 are damaged severely enough to be uninhabitable without major repairs. The church, which stood for 300 years, has lost its roof and one wall. The crossroads at the village center is cratered, roads impassable until engineers fill the holes and grade the surface. Unexploded ordnance litters the area, artillery shells that buried themselves in soft ground without detonating, grenades dropped in the chaos of night fighting, mines laid by both sides and not recovered. The village will require months of clearance before it is safe for civilians to return. Belgian families begin returning to Manhay in early January, as soon as American authorities declare the area secure. What they find breaks hearts and spirits. Marie Bodson returns to discover her house still standing but looted of everything valuable. The windows shot out, the walls pockmarked with bullet strikes. Her garden, where she grew vegetables to feed her family, is now a cemetery of sorts. 5 German soldiers buried in hasty graves marked only with crosses made from ammunition boxes. Her husband Jacques finds the barn where he kept farm equipment destroyed, the machinery stolen or destroyed. Their daughter Annette, 8 years old, stands in the ruins of what was her home and asks simply, "Where will we live?" It is a question with no good answer. The immediate aftermath of battle reveals suffering that casualty statistics cannot capture. American field hospitals treat frostbite cases by the hundreds, soldiers who endured days in sub-zero temperatures without adequate clothing or shelter. The medical treatment for severe frostbite in 1945 is primitive. Warm the affected areas gradually, administer pain medication, wait to see how much tissue dies, then amputate what cannot be saved. Entire wards fill with soldiers missing toes, fingers, sometimes hands or feet. These are not dramatic battlefield wounds, but the slow attrition of winter warfare, casualties that will burden the Veterans Administration for decades as amputees require ongoing care and artificial limbs. The psychological casualties are harder to quantify, but equally real. Soldiers who fought at Manhay show symptoms that 1945 military medicine calls battle fatigue or combat exhaustion, what later generations will recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Lieutenant James Grimball, the tank commander who survived both Manhay and Grand Manille, finds himself unable to sleep without nightmares of being trapped in a burning tank. Captain John Jordan, who held Grand Manille against 7 German assaults, develops a stress-induced stomach ulcer that will require surgery. Private Joseph Martin, who survived the Christmas Eve attack in his foxhole, becomes unable to tolerate loud noises without panic attacks. The Army treats these cases with rest, light duty, and the assumption that soldiers will recover given time. Some do. Others carry the psychological scars for life. The graves registration units face the grim task of identifying and burying the dead. American soldiers killed at Manhay are eventually buried at the Henri Chapelle American Cemetery in Belgium, row upon row of white crosses and stars of David, marking men who died far from home. Each grave is marked with a temporary marker during the war, replaced after the war with permanent marble markers. The families receive notification. The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your son, husband, brother was killed in action on date in Belgium. The telegrams are standard form, impersonal by necessity, unable to convey that death was quick or slow, painful or merciful, meaningful or random. The German dead receive different treatment, reflecting the reality that they are enemy casualties. Some are buried in mass graves near where they fell, crude markers indicating approximate numbers and the unit they belong to. Others are buried in temporary cemeteries established by the Wehrmacht during its occupation, later consolidated into permanent German military cemeteries. Unlike the ordered rows of American graves with individual markers, German mass graves often hold dozens of soldiers in unmarked interment. This is not cruelty, but practicality. Germany lost the war, has no capacity to recover and individually bury its war dead, and the Allies have no obligation to provide for enemy casualties beyond basic humanity. The Belgian civilians who died at Manhay are buried in the village cemetery, small marble markers with names and dates. But these markers tell incomplete stories. Georges Petit, shot by SS troops for alleged collaboration with Americans, is buried without any marker indicating how he died, his family too frightened to publicly accuse German soldiers, even after Germany's defeat. The two teenage boys, the brothers found with bound hands, are buried together, their shared grave marked simply with names and died December 1904. No details about circumstances. The families know the truth, the village knows the truth, but official records remain carefully vague, avoiding accusations that might trigger investigations or reprisals even after the war ends. The long-term physical consequences of the Battle of Manhay extend beyond immediate casualties. The environmental destruction, 167 acres of forest destroyed by shelling, will take decades to regenerate. The soil contamination from thousands of exploding shells, from burning vehicles leaking oil and fuel, from decomposing remains, will persist for years. The roads, cratered and mined, require extensive engineering work before normal traffic can resume. The local economy, dependent on agriculture and forestry, collapses as families cannot farm or harvest timber from lands still littered with unexploded ordnance. The Belgian government will provide some relief payments, but they are inadequate to replace homes, equipment, livestock, and years of lost productivity. The veterans of Manhay begin the long process of trying to return to normal life, carrying physical and psychological wounds that never fully heal. Of the American soldiers who fought at Manhay, approximately 34% will receive permanent disability ratings from the Veterans Administration, ranging from 5% disability for minor injuries to 100% for severe disabilities requiring full-time care. The German veterans face different challenges. Many spend years in prisoner of war camps before repatriation, return to a Germany that is occupied and divided, struggle to find employment in an economy destroyed by war. Some veterans on both sides will form organizations, stay in touch, gather occasionally to remember those who did not survive. Most simply try to forget, to rebuild lives, to avoid thinking about those days in December 1944 when the world became a frozen hell. For the Belgian civilians of Manhay, the aftermath is a long struggle to rebuild lives, homes, and community. The village receives some reconstruction, assistance from the Belgian government, and from international relief organizations. But resources are limited in a country that suffered 4 years of occupation and extensive war damage. Families like the Bodsons rebuild slowly, one season at a time, first making homes barely habitable, then gradually restoring them to something like pre-war condition. The church is not fully repaired until 1952, 7 years after the battle. The psychological recovery takes even longer. Children who experience the battle, like Annette Bodson, grow up with memories that shape their entire lives, teaching them that security is fragile and peace is not guaranteed. The immediate aftermath of Manhay fades into history as the war continues, as other battles draw attention, as the focus shifts from Belgium to Germany to the final defeat of the Third Reich. But for those who were there, for the soldiers who fought and the civilians who endured, Manhay remains vivid long after the war ends. Decades later, veterans will return to walk the ground where they fought, trying to reconcile memory with reality, trying to make sense of experiences that defy easy explanation. They will find a quiet Belgian village, rebuilt and peaceful, with few visible signs of the battle that occurred there. And they will wonder if it all really happened, if the carnage and terror were real, or just nightmares that have finally faded. But the marble markers in the cemetery, the names of 467 Americans who never came home, prove that it was real, that Manhay was not a nightmare, but history, written in blood and snow, and the stubborn human refusal to quit even when defeat seems certain. 1965, June. Frank Towers, age 42, stands at the Manhay Crossroads for the first time since December 1944. He is an American veteran, former sergeant in the 7th Armored Division, survivor of the Christmas Eve battle. He has come to Belgium with his wife on a European vacation, but the real purpose of this trip is to confront memories that have haunted him for 21 years. Towers walks slowly through the rebuilt village, trying to match what he sees to what he remembers. The church has a new roof, the stone houses are repaired, their walls no longer pockmarked with bullet strikes. The crossroads is paved and peaceful, cars passing through without knowing that this intersection was once soaked in blood. A Belgian shopkeeper, seeing an American studying the village intently, approaches and asks in accented English, "Were you here during the war?" Towers nods, unable to speak. The shopkeeper clasps his hand. "Thank you. We remember." The Battle of Manhay has been systematically forgotten in American popular memory, overshadowed by more famous actions in the Battle of the Bulge. When Americans think of the Bulge, they think of Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne Division held out while surrounded, where General Anthony McAuliffe responded to a German surrender demand with a single word: nuts. Bastogne becomes the symbol of American determination, the story featured in books and movies and commemorative events. Manhay, where the fighting was equally fierce and the stakes equally high, disappears into the footnotes of history. The reasons for this disparity are multiple. Bastogne had a clear narrative of heroic defense. Manhay had a confusing narrative of defeat followed by victory. Bastogne had a quotable commander. Manhay had competent but unmemorable officers. Bastogne held throughout. Manhay fell temporarily to the Germans. The popular culture of World War II, particularly Hollywood films, reinforces the selective memory. The 1965 film Battle of the Bulge, starring Henry Fonda, features Bastogne prominently, and Manhay not at all. The film takes significant liberties with historical accuracy, showing German King Tiger tanks that were never in the Ardennes and depicting battles that never occurred in the form shown. But the film reaches millions of Americans, shapes how they understand the Battle of the Bulge, and cements Bastogne's place in national memory while erasing smaller actions like Manhay. Historians and veterans complain about the inaccuracies, but popular culture has more influence on collective memory than academic history. The historical record itself contributes to Manhay's obscurity. Stephen Ambrose, the popular historian whose books define World War II for many Americans, dedicates 45 pages to Bastogne in his 1997 book, Citizen Soldiers, but only 2 pages to Manhay. This is not Ambrose's failure, but reflects the available sources. Bastogne generated extensive documentation, official reports, personal memoirs, and post-war analysis. Manhay generated less documentation because the units involved were shattered and scattered, because the command confusion made official reporting fragmentary, because the veterans who survived often wanted to forget rather than memorialize. The battles that get remembered are not necessarily the most important, but the ones with the best documentation and the clearest narratives. The academic reassessment of Manhay begins in the early 2000s, when military historians start examining the Battle of the Bulge with more granular attention to specific engagements. Peter Caddick Adams, in his 2014 book, Snow and Steel, dedicates substantial analysis to Manhay, arguing that it was as critical to stopping the German offensive as the more famous actions at Bastogne and Elsenborn. Anthony Beevor, in his 2015 book, Ardennes 1944, similarly elevates Manhay's importance, noting that the delays imposed on the 2nd SS Panzer Division at Manhay and Grand Mesnil prevented the potential breakthrough to the Meuse that might have achieved German strategic objectives. These academic works reach smaller audiences than popular histories, but begin shifting expert understanding of the battle's significance. The Belgian preservation efforts ensure that Manhay's story is not completely forgotten, even if American memory is selective. The village establishes a small museum in 1994, the 50th anniversary of the battle, displaying artifacts recovered from the battlefield, shell casings, helmets, personal items from both American and German soldiers. The museum includes photographs of the village before, during, and after the battle, showing the destruction and the reconstruction. Each December, the village holds a commemoration ceremony where the names of American and Belgian dead are read aloud, wreaths are placed at the memorial, and veterans, if any are still alive, are honored. These ceremonies are small, attended mostly by local Belgians and occasional American tourists, but they ensure that local memory survives even as broader memory fades. The veterans themselves have complicated relationships with memory and commemoration. Some, like Frank Towers, eventually return to Manhay, seeking some kind of closure or understanding. They walk the battlefield, meet Belgian civilians who remember, try to explain to their families what happened here. Others never return, never speak of their experiences, carry the memories silently until death. The motivations for silence are varied. Some find the memories too painful, some feel that civilians cannot understand, some believe their experiences are not worth commemorating because they were just doing their job. The result is that much first-hand testimony is lost, as veterans die without recording their stories. The few published memoirs that mention Manhay provide fragments of experience but not comprehensive narratives. Sergeant William Morrison, who survived the prisoner execution, writes a brief memoir in 1978 that includes a chapter on Manhay. Lieutenant James Grimball publishes a self-printed book in 1985 about his tank company's experiences in the war, dedicating 10 pages to Manhay and Grand Mesnil. These memoirs are valuable historical sources, but reach tiny audiences, printed in small runs, available mainly to military history enthusiasts and researchers. They do not shape popular understanding the way best-selling books or major films do. The annual veterans reunions, held by various units that fought at Manhay, preserve memory within small communities but do not project it to broader public. The 7th Armored Division holds reunions through the 1980s and 90s, each gathering smaller than the last as veterans age and die. At these reunions, men who fought together 60 years ago shake hands, embrace, remember friends who did not survive. They show photographs, share stories, fill in details of what happened in their particular corner of the battle. But these gatherings are private, the stories shared only among those who were there, reinforcing memory within the veteran community, but not transmitting it to the general public or even to the veterans' own families. The question of why some battles are remembered while others are forgotten reveals uncomfortable truths about how history is constructed. Memory is not objective recording of the past, but selective narrative shaped by what serves present purposes. Bastogne serves American national mythology, heroic defenders holding out against overwhelming odds, refusing to surrender, ultimately relieved by Patton's dramatic advance. The narrative is clean, inspirational, suitable for teaching patriotism. Manhay's narrative is messier: initial defeat, atrocities committed by the enemy, eventual victory through overwhelming material superiority rather than individual heroism. It is a story that emphasizes America's industrial strength more than its fighting spirit, a story that includes war crimes and suffering civilians, a story less suitable for simple patriotic commemoration. The families of men who died at Manhay struggle with the obscurity of the battle. Unlike families of soldiers killed at famous battles like D-Day or the Battle of the Bulge at Bastogne, they find little public recognition of where their loved ones died or why. The marble crosses at Henri Chapelle Cemetery mark individual graves, but give no context, no explanation of what the dead were fighting for at this particular place. Some families research obsessively, trying to understand what happened, corresponding with other families whose sons or husbands or brothers died in the same action. Others accept the mystery, knowing only that death occurred somewhere in Belgium, in winter, in a battle whose name means nothing to anyone who was not there. By the early 21st century, as the last veterans of Manhay die, the battle threatens to fade completely from living memory into historical record. The transition from living memory to history is always fraught. Stories that were told face-to-face become words on pages. Experiences that were shared become data to be analyzed. Human connections become footnotes. The Belgian Museum at Manhay works to preserve what it can. Oral history, interviews with the last veterans, photographs and artifacts, documentary films. But there is no substitute for the presence of someone who was actually there, who can answer questions, who can make the past feel real rather than abstract. When the last veteran dies, something irreplaceable is lost, no matter how good the documentation. The obscurity of Manhay raises the philosophical question. If a battle is forgotten, does it still matter? The 467 Americans who died there mattered to their families, to their communities, to themselves. The sacrifice was real, regardless of whether history remembers. But there is something troubling about the disparity between importance and memory, between what actually determined outcomes and what we choose to commemorate. Manhay was as critical to stopping the German offensive as Bastogne, cost nearly as many casualties, involved equally desperate fighting. Yet one battle is famous and the other forgotten, not because of any difference in historical significance, but because of narrative luck and the accidents of commemoration. This tells us something uncomfortable about how history works. What we remember is not necessarily what mattered most, but what makes the best story. 2025, present day. At the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, military officers study the Battle of Manhay as a case study in defensive operations and transition to counteroffensive. The lessons drawn from this small battle in 1944 remain relevant to modern warfare. The importance of command and control, the necessity of combined arms coordination, the power of logistics and material superiority, the fragility of even elite units when exhausted and unsupported. The Staff College instructors emphasize that Manhay demonstrates both what went wrong in the American defense and what went right in the counterattack, providing positive and negative lessons for officers who may someday command similar operations. The tactical lessons from Manhay are numerous and enduring. First, the critical importance of communications. The American defense collapsed partly because units could not communicate with each other or with higher headquarters, could not coordinate fires, could not call for support. Modern military doctrine emphasizes redundant communication systems, multiple methods of command and control, precisely to prevent the communications breakdown that doomed Manhay's defenders. Second, the danger of night attacks by skilled opponents. The German Christmas Eve assault succeeded largely because darkness negated American firepower advantages and allowed elite troops to achieve surprise. Modern armies invest heavily in night vision technology and night fighting training to prevent such surprises. Third, Manhay demonstrates the importance of combined arms warfare, the integration of infantry, armor, artillery, and air power into mutually supporting operations. The American counterattack succeeded because it combined all these elements effectively. Artillery suppressed defenders, tanks provided mobile firepower, infantry cleared positions, air power interdicted German reinforcements. No single arm could have achieved victory alone, but their combination created overwhelming combat power. Modern military doctrine is built on this principle of combined arms integration, though the specific technologies have evolved from Shermans and P-47s to Abrams tanks and Apache helicopters. Fourth, the battle illustrates the decisive advantage of air superiority in modern warfare. For 10 days, the Germans advanced while weather grounded Allied aircraft. For 3 days after the weather cleared, German forces were systematically destroyed from the air. This contrast demonstrates that ground forces, no matter how skilled or well-equipped, cannot survive in the modern battle space without protection from air attack. Every major military since 1945 has recognized this lesson, investing enormous resources in either achieving air superiority or developing air defense systems to deny it to enemies. The strategic lessons from Manhay extend beyond purely military considerations to questions of national capacity and will. Germany possessed superior tanks, veteran soldiers, innovative tactics, and high morale at the start of the Bulge offensive. But Germany lacked the industrial capacity to sustain losses, the population to replace casualties, the fuel to keep vehicles moving, and ultimately the strategic depth to recover from setbacks. The United States possessed none of Germany's tactical advantages, but all of its strategic advantages: unlimited industrial production, vast population to draw on, secure supply lines, and the ability to accept battlefield defeats while preparing larger victories. Manhay demonstrates that in industrial warfare, logistics and production capacity matter more than tactical excellence. The human lessons from Manhay resist easy categorization but matter as much as tactical or strategic analysis. The battle shows ordinary people, soldiers, and civilians, displaying extraordinary courage under impossible circumstances. American soldiers holding positions they knew were doomed. German soldiers following orders even when they knew the offensive had failed. Belgian civilians enduring violence they did not cause and could not escape. But the battle also shows human cruelty, the execution of prisoners, the terror inflicted on civilians, the casual acceptance of atrocity as military necessity. These contradictions, courage and cruelty existing side by side, are fundamental to understanding not just Manhay but war itself. The question of how the Battle of Manhay applies to modern warfare requires careful analysis. The specific tactics and technologies are outdated. No modern army uses Sherman tanks or Panther tanks. Communication systems have evolved beyond field telephones and vacuum tube radios. Modern artillery has precision guidance that did not exist in 1944. But the fundamental principles remain constant. Surprise achieves results beyond force ratios. Defense in depth reduces vulnerability to breakthrough. Counterattack must follow quickly to prevent enemy consolidation. Air power is decisive if integrated with ground operations. Officers studying Manhay do not learn specific techniques to copy, but principles to adapt to whatever circumstances they face. The memorial at Manhay today is modest. It's a stone monument listing the names of American and Belgian dead, a small museum displaying artifacts, a few interpretive signs explaining what happened here. Tourists occasionally stop, read the signs, take photographs, then continue to more famous sites like Bastogne. The village itself shows no scars from the battle. All the destroyed buildings have been rebuilt. The cratered roads have been repaved. The forests have regrown. Only the cemetery markers and the memorial remind visitors that 80 years ago, this quiet crossroads was a battlefield where hundreds died. The contrast between the peaceful present and the violent past illustrates how thoroughly war's traces can be erased by time and reconstruction. But for historians and military professionals, Manhay remains significant precisely because it is not famous, not mythologized, not distorted by decades of commemoration and narrative shaping. The battle can be studied as it actually happened rather than as popular memory wishes it had happened. The mistakes can be acknowledged without threatening national pride. The costs can be calculated without dismissing them for patriotic reasons. The lessons can be learned without filtering them through myth. In some ways, Manhay's obscurity makes it more valuable as a teaching case than more famous battles whose histories are encrusted with legend. The Belgian civilians who maintain the Manhay Memorial do so not for tourism or national prestige, but from a sense of debt and remembrance. Americans and Germans died fighting over their village, defending or attacking positions that mattered strategically but were simply home to the Belgians who lived there. The maintenance of memory becomes a moral obligation. These men died here. Their sacrifice deserves acknowledgement. Their families deserve to know that someone remembers. The annual December ceremony, attended by perhaps 50 people in a village of 200, matters not because it attracts attention, but because it preserves truth. These men existed, they fought, they died, and their deaths mattered even if the world has largely forgotten. The unanswered questions about Manhay will remain unanswered as the last witnesses die. What exactly happened to the 23 Americans listed as missing, never recovered? Were they killed in action and their bodies never found? Or were they executed as prisoners, or did they survive and disappear into prisoner of war camps and somehow never make it home? The truth died with them and with whatever German soldiers knew what happened. What happened in the hours when the SS controlled the village? How many atrocities were committed? How many Belgian civilians died from deliberate killing versus being caught in crossfire? The investigation produced a report, but not definitive answers, and definitive answers are now impossible. The final lesson from Manhay may be about the nature of historical memory itself. We remember what we choose to remember, what serves our present purposes, what makes compelling narratives. We forget what is inconvenient, what complicates simple stories, what does not fit our preferred understanding of the past. Manhay is forgotten, not because it did not matter, but because it mattered in ways that American culture finds difficult to commemorate. Initial defeat, reliance on material superiority rather than fighting spirit, victory purchased through overwhelming firepower rather than individual heroism. The battle demonstrates that America won World War II not primarily through the courage of individual soldiers, though that courage was real, but through industrial capacity, logistical organization, and the ability to lose battles while winning wars. What do we owe to those who fought at forgotten Crossroads? The 467 Americans who died at Manhay were not fighting to be remembered or to become part of national mythology. They were fighting because they were ordered to fight, because their comrades depended on them, because retreat or surrender seemed worse than standing and fighting. They deserve memory, not because they achieved fame, but because they sacrificed everything. The same is true of the 598 Germans who died. Though their cause was evil and their defeat necessary, they were human beings, not abstractions, and their deaths mattered to someone even if history has forgotten their names. The 23 Belgian civilians killed deserve memory simply for being victims of violence they did not choose and could not escape. The Battle of Manhay, that small engagement in a small village on a cold December week in 1944, matters not because it was decisive in isolation, but because it exemplifies how wars are actually fought and won. Through the accumulation of small actions, through soldiers doing their duty in obscure places, through sacrifice that goes unrecorded and unremembered by everyone except those who were there. We honor the famous battles and famous soldiers, which is right and proper. But we should also remember that most soldiers fight in places history forgets, that most sacrifice goes unrecorded, that most courage is displayed in battles whose names mean nothing to anyone who was not there. Manhay stands for all those forgotten battles, all those small crossroads where men fought and died while the world looked elsewhere, all those places where history was made by people who have no place in history books. The young officers at Fort Leavenworth studying Manhay will probably never fight a battle exactly like it. Modern warfare has evolved beyond recognition in technology, if not in fundamental nature. But they will face similar challenges: confusion, fear, exhaustion, the requirement to make life and death decisions with incomplete information. They will lead soldiers who, like the soldiers at Manhay, are ordinary people asked to do extraordinary things. They will fail sometimes, as the American commanders failed on Christmas Eve, and must learn from failure. They will succeed sometimes, as the American commanders succeeded on December 27th, and must not let success breed overconfidence. The study of history, even obscure history like Manhay, teaches this fundamental lesson: that war is ultimately about human beings under stress, and understanding how humans behave under stress is more important than memorizing tactics or technology. And so, the story of Manhay ends where it began. At a crossroads in Belgium, quiet now, peaceful, rebuilt, and repaired until little trace remains of the violence that occurred there. The soldiers are gone, dead or old, or simply moved on with their lives. The civilians who endured the battle are mostly gone too, replaced by generations who know the story only secondhand. The tanks and guns have long since been scrapped or collected by museums. Even the physical landscape has changed, forests regrowing, buildings replacing buildings, roads rebuilt. But the memory persists, maintained by a few historians, a few veterans' descendants, a few Belgian civilians who feel obligated to remember. And perhaps that is enough. Not fame, not glory, not a place in national mythology, but simply the acknowledgement that here, once, men fought and died for reasons that seemed important at the time, and remain important to those who understand what was at stake. Manhay matters not because everyone knows about it, but because someone remembers.